markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the S&P, little change right now, up by just 1 point, but the Dow, very different story, down 231 points, down now by 0.6%. NASDAQ higher by 48, up by about 0.3%. Stocks are being whipsawed. Traders gearing up for the U.S. ABC News presidential debate tonight and a key inflation reading, CPI, tomorrow morning. Oil is sinking. Brent below $70 a barrel. Barrel of Brent right now, $69.22, down 3.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 4.3%. WTI 65.73 a barrel. The S&P up 1 point, little change there. The Dow down 227, slumping 0.6%, while NASDAQ higher by 49, up now by 0.3%. 10-year 3.65%, the 2-year 3.62%, and spot gold right now up 0.4%, 25.15 for a barrel of WTI. China's exports accelerated in August, providing a rare boost to its ailing economy. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Gains were widespread, spanning the globe. Official data from Beijing show Chinese exports to the U.S. alone rose the most since September 2022. The EU, India, and Brazil drew sizable increases too. Even so, Chinese price cutting has prompted countries to impose tariffs on electric cars, steel, and other goods. Bloomberg Economics says Chinese economic growth will likely extend its 5-quarter losing streak into 2025. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Southwest Airlines shares are lower by 3.7%. Chairman Gary Kelly is stepping down along with 6 directors. It is a dramatic step after the carrier faced calls for a strategic overhaul from activist investor Elliott Investment Management. Again, Southwest shares down now by 3.85%. Recapping stocks mixed. The Dow down 0.5%. S&P 500 index little changed, up now by just under 0.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pelleton, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're also streaming live on YouTube as well. I've been a loyal BMW customer for probably, 25, 30 years. Currently driving the X3, which is the best vehicle I've ever driven, period. Not a good day, however, for the stock of BMW, down 11% today. That's the most since March 16th, 2020. Just the beginning of the pandemic, and it's the lowest since 2021. So tough times out there for BMW. Let's get the latest of what's happening with them. Michael Dean, head of global autos at Bloomberg Intelligence, joins us from London via Zoom. Michael, what's going on with BMW today? I saw that they took their earnings forecast down. What's driving that?
So BMW had a profit warning today, and that was partly on the back of a warranty issue it has with its brakes, not on the X3, so you're fine, Paul.
Good, no problem.
But they're going to have to recall 1.5 million vehicles, and that's going to cost a high 3-digit million in terms of earnings for 2024. But that doesn't tell the whole story, because they've downgraded their margin by about 200 basis points, which is about 2 billion of EBIT. So the balance of that is coming from weaker China sales, lower pricing in Europe, lower demand in Europe. So just the demand and pricing environment globally has been very difficult, and that's part of the reason for the profit warning.
Which then leads us to Volkswagen. So the latest news today is that it's ending its job protections for auto workers in Germany as part of its cost-cutting push. These were several agreements that were linked to a 3-decades-old pact that was supposed to safeguard employment until 2029, but now those guarantees are going to run out by the middle of next year. I mean, wow.
Yeah, so, Volkswagen was in the news last week because it said it needs to close 500,000 units of capacity in Germany. So that's very difficult because of workers' rights. And, workers' rights have been very one-sided for Volkswagen in particular, because you have VW law. And this is where 20% of the ordinary shares, the voting shares, are owned by the state of Lower Saxony, which is where Volkswagen's biggest factory is. And funnily enough, they have the ability to block certain agreements. So workers' rights are very strong for Volkswagen employees. And now I think management are saying, okay, hold on a minute. The automotive world is changing rapidly. We need to do something to reduce costs. And part of that is to close factories and reduce jobs.
Michael, give us just a 30,000-foot view of the global auto business here. I mean, the weakness that you're seeing in Europe, the weakness you're seeing in China, is that just general economic weakness affecting that we've seen in past cycles, or is this something to do with this ongoing transition to electric vehicles?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. So, you have the transition to battery electric vehicles. It's going much slower than expected in Western markets. Other markets probably going quicker than expected, such as China. But the problem Volkswagen has is that the competition is so intense and has overtaken them in China, such as BYD. So Volkswagen a couple of years ago was the market leader in China. Now BYD, within 2 years, has overtaken Volkswagen. Mm-hmm. And really, it's going to be a survival of the fittest in these markets.
Well, I mean, these companies aren't going to go under or anything, right? So I guess I'm wondering when the trough is. When do we know? What is a trough actually going to look like?
Well, you say, well, a lot of companies could go under, particularly the pure play battery electric vehicle companies.
But I mean, I just meant that like Germany's not going to let Volkswagen go bankrupt. Was my point.
No, of course. And the interesting thing, if you look at the valuation of Volkswagen, today it's valued at 45 billion euros. I've had a lot of clients talk to me about this today. They have almost 40 billion of cash on the balance sheet. Their 75% stake in Porsche is worth 45 billion euros. They own Lamborghini brand, which has higher profitability rates than Ferrari, which is currently valued at 77 billion. So we think Lamborghini is worth 30 billion if you use a Ferrari valuation. So the sum of the parts is Volkswagen is huge compared to the actual valuation of Volkswagen at the moment.
So you highlight an area for me that just kind of feels like a long-term issue, which is China. I mean, they spend decades, they being any auto company, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, whatever, building brand value and brand loyalty in a market like China. And in a period of 2 years, they've lost that, it seems like. I mean, is that the real bearish case for some of these global auto companies?
It's a big case. So for the German automakers, in the past few years, China was the most profitable market. It accounted for 35-40% of their profits. Now this year, it could be as low as 10%. And what the market's pricing is that could be zero in the future. And that's because the technology changing and the way that startups in China are pushing through so quickly. They're really fighting for market share at the moment and their future.
So then it goes back to my question. What does the bottom for either U.S. car companies or for European car companies wind up looking like as the tariffs go into place, as China keeps producing these really cheap EVs, as we have different restrictions here in the U.S.? Like, what is that?
Well, you look at what GM and Ford have done. I mean, GM in particular, it's looked at different markets, and if it's not profitable, it's pulled out of those markets. Right. So China is one example, Europe's another example. So it's whether the German automakers take a view that can they be profitable in China in the future. And many foreign car makers are saying no. Volkswagen at the moment is saying yes, we can, and they've got this long-term plan, and they've invested in XPeng to hopefully accelerate their transition. But it's going to be very, very difficult for foreign car makers to continue to make profits in China.
So, I mean, again, it feels like, is there even discussion of whether they should be there at some point?
Certainly within the market, but for the company itself, that they've invested heavily in China. And they've got a plan now to try and catch up with local producers, to catch up with BYD, which is with this partnership with XPeng. So they think they've got an opportunity because they've got a good brand in China, but it's going to be very tough. I mean, pricing in China is really, really competitive at the moment, to the point where battery electric vehicles are actually priced below internal combustion engine vehicles. Wow. Compared to that to Europe, where the average battery electric vehicle is 35% higher than a ICE vehicle, and they still can barely make a profit in Europe. So that's it's a very tough environment.
Yeah, so then they'll have an EV factory there, but then all of a sudden you're looking at potential losses then for workers in actual Germany. All right, really interesting story. Yep. Thank you very much, Michael Dean, joining us from Bloomberg Intelligence. Coming up, Allison McNeely, Bloomberg private equity reporter, will be joining us. It's the big take story of the day, how private equity is fighting traditional insurers for that $15 trillion haul. It's a great story. I read it this morning. You should definitely check it out. Taking a look at the markets here in the NASDAQ. up slightly, just up by 0.1%. S&P now flipping into negative territory. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Tuesday, happy debate day, happy pre-CPI day. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and economics and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries all around the world. We also tap our amazing team of Bloomberg News reporters. In particular, every day we have a Bloomberg Big Take, which is a wonderful thematic deep dive on topics ranging from politics to investing to geopolitics, anywhere you name it. And today's is on private equity now fighting traditional insurers for that $15 trillion haul. Allison McNeely, Bloomberg private equity reporter, joins us now on this big take. This is a great story. Can you just set it up for us? Like, what's this $15 trillion pie and who's competing for that pie?
Yeah, so $15 trillion is the potential market opportunity basically for retirement assets. So we're talking about annuities, we're talking about corporate pensions, and we're talking about individual retirement plans, defined contribution 401k.
Yes, so it's basically like, where does that money go to then make money? Where does it typically go? And then what are, say, private equity guys trying to do it?
Exactly. So traditionally, it's been managed by incumbent insurers that you and I all know, such as MetLife, Prudential. But really, over the past decade, we've seen private equity firms, particularly Apollo Global Management, move into the insurance business through various subsidiaries that they create and acquire. And the reason why they want to do this is they're looking for steady sources of new capital to invest in products that they create. And in Apollo's case, they co-founded Athene, their insurer, in 2009. decline sort of in the wake of the financial crisis. And they have become the top seller of annuities products in the US through, sort of steadily amassing capital. They sell annuities to individual retirees. They take that money and they invest it in private credit products that they structure.
All right, hold on. If I'm a widow and an orphan, I want my retirement in a safe, boring bond portfolio. I don't want the hotshots at a buyout firm like Apollo putting it into, I don't know what they're putting it into.
Yeah.
What's the regulatory issue here? I mean, isn't somebody looking out for my little nest egg?
Yeah, so how we got into the story is we started hearing from sources in the spring about this niche regulatory fight about essentially how much capital insurers should be required to hold against the riskiest part of structured credit. And essentially this tiny little fight has become really a proxy battle for the whole industry because regulators, essentially private equity has moved into insurance so fast, and now regulators are trying to catch up and say, hey, what's really in these private credit investments? Are they really investment grade? Are they really as safe as these firms say they are? And truly, it's incumbent insurers who are helping to put this pressure on the regulators because they're kind of getting their lunch eaten, so to speak, by private equity firms who've moved in. So it's become a risk fight, a regulatory fight, but also a business fight, a competition fight of who is going to be able to access that $15 trillion opportunity.
Who should be able to access it? I know private equity insurers are going to say something different, but when you talk to other experts, you can't just put all your money in a 10-year note, right? I mean, that's not going to do anything for you with returns like this. You need something if this is what you're counting on to live off of, no?
Exactly. And so people who are sort of in favor of this sort of evolution of the market will tell you that these private credit assets or private investments are actually good diversification for the industry. They provide better yields than, say, a traditional corporate bond or a treasury note. And the reality is that millions of savers don't have enough money for retirement. And, the traditional bond portfolio isn't getting them there. So they'll tell you these are safe assets, they're appropriately asset liability matched, and this kind of innovation is exactly what the industry needs in order to make sure people have enough money to retire.
Well, I'll tell you, this has been a great growth business. Private, yes, some great charts in this big take story like we typically have. Thank you, Matt Winkler, for doing that for Bloomberg News. Private equity-backed insurers' assets have surged. So it's looking like private equity, going back to 2012, almost zero. Now, almost $900 billion of just assets. It's just extraordinary. Is this expected to continue? And why aren't other private equity companies in this business?
It is expected to continue, and more firms are getting in by the day. There's sort of a couple different strategies. One is sort of the whole ownership model, which is the model that Apollo and KKR follow, where they own the entire insurance company. But then you also have the Blackstone model, where they essentially form partnerships with insurance companies and form agreements with them where they manage assets in exchange for receiving essentially the flow of capital. And so it seems like every day we're seeing a new private equity firm try to spin up some kind of insurance strategy to get access to assets. And I expect we'll see much more of this.
Well, it was a great piece. Thank you so much for it. Allison McNeely, Bloomberg private equity reporter, joining us in that big take story. You can check it out online. It's private equity fights traditional insurers for the $15 trillion haul. Do people still do annuities? My parents have an annuity.
I don't.
Are they still a thing that people do?
I think it's more of a 401k thing, right?
Right, that's what I would think. But who knows?
Yeah.
I mean,
who's got a pension anymore?
Well, actually, teachers.
Yep.
My friend's a teacher.
Yep.
They have a pension.
Big California state teachers pension fund, Texas teachers fund, all those big states.
Yeah, it's there.
Okay.
The money's there. Okay, so this is it. We have the debate tonight, and we have CPI tomorrow. In the meantime, you're still looking at JP Morgan, Paul. That stock is getting hit pretty hard, down by 7.15%. That's what happens when you have your president, Daniel Pinto, coming out and saying that you're too optimistic about next year's expenses and net interest income. Ouch.
Yep, and we've seen, I think at this conference, I don't know who's throwing the conference, but it seems to be the opportunity. Barclays, okay. Seems to be the time for the big investment banking execs to come up and kind of throw the kitchen sink in a little bit, pre-announce a little bit their earnings are going to be a little bit light, kind of setting the bar a little bit lower.
But JP Morgan is the creme de la creme, right? So he does say that they have a very, very strong performance in debt capital markets, though. So that's going to help their investment bank.
Just over the past couple of weeks, the new issuance market and the investment grade market has been extraordinarily strong.
That's such a good point. But is that coming before the election and kind of bring forward demand, or is it new demand? All right, anyway, that wraps it up for me and Paul on this Tuesday. Coming up, Balance of Power with Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
It's the day of days for the campaigns. The big debate is here. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as we count down to the first and possibly only debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. We'll have reporting and insights ahead this hour from the best of Bloomberg. David Gura on the scene in Philadelphia for us. Laura Davison and Nathan Dean with me here in Washington, and Abigail Doolittle with the market's perspective in New York. We set the table and then bring in our signature panel for analysis. You know you need Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano today. They're both here for the hour, and it all starts after a look at Wall Street. Speaking of the baseline, let's see where we are with the markets. Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. And where are we right now? We are down. Leg lower all of a sudden here for the Dow. The S&P, NASDAQ very much in the red. We've got the S&P right now down 23 points, a drop of just about 0.4%. The Dow now lower by 359 points, down 0.9%. NASDAQ down 63, a drop there of 0.4%. 10-year at 3.64%, with the 2-year right now 3.59%. Gold up $6 the ounce, 25.12, higher by 0.2%. Big move for crude oil today. We've got West Texas Intermediate down 4.5% with a 65 handle right now. Oil stocks moving lower as well. WTI at 65.58. West Texas Intermediate crude lower. Brent crude at 69.03, moving below $70 a barrel today. We've got Brent down by 3.9%. Well, certainly the next big event for markets takes place tonight with the ABC News presidential debate, which will be simulcast on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Laura Rame is chief U.S. economist at FS Investments.
I'm not sure that the debate per se is going to be as impactful, but I think both candidates are clearly focused on pro-growth policies that are going to be inflationary in one way or another. So it's another reason why I think markets are underweighting the impact of those pro-growth policies in the beginning of the year.
And, of course, you can hear the debate itself, the ABC News presidential debate, 9 p.m. Wall Street time. Special coverage with our Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons kicking off at 8 o'clock tonight right here on Bloomberg Radio. Right now, banks under pressure. Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase all dropping. Regulators will be making sweeping changes to their bank capital rules proposal, cutting the expected impact of the largest banks by half and exempting smaller lenders from large portions of the measure. Again, recapping, stocks lower. S&P right now down 26, a drop there of 0.5% for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues now. Once again, your host, and here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, we thank you so much as ever. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power. We're live in Washington, of course, with our eyes on Philadelphia. I'm Joe Matthew. Hour one here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where you can always find us. Search Bloomberg Global News. It's pretty simple. Look for our live feed. We'll meet you there. We always save you a seat in the studio. There is real news today in Washington, this idea of kicking the can for 6 months, advancing in the House last evening. You might not have heard about it. The Rules Committee, despite opposition from some conservative Republicans, approving this rule that covers a 6-month stopgap solution. Then the rule goes to the floor and they move ahead with the analysis and the voting, the arguing, I should say, and the voting that will not bring forth a solution. We'll get to that, because the fact of the matter is there is only one story today, and it's one in Philadelphia that starts at 9 p.m. The grand debate, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on stage for the first time, in fact, meeting for the first time. Can't wait to see what the ratings are here. About 50 million watched the first go-around between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, if I remember correctly. I suspect they'll top that number tonight as they gather at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. Now, this is a big enough story that Bloomberg has deployed the asset. David Gura is in the field. He's in Philadelphia for the big showdown tonight. He's going to be bringing us a lot of the sights and sounds of this whole throwdown today, this evening in our special coverage. And yes, right now, David, it is great to see you. You're in the spin room, as they call it. Give us the lay of the land.
Joe, kind as always. Thank you very much. Yes, we're here, and Center City is getting a little bit busier here as we approach the start of this debate tonight. We're in the spin room in the convention center, a few blocks away from where this debate is going to take place in the National Constitution Center. It'll be much like the last debate in Atlanta, a room without an audience. You'll have the two moderators from ABC News, David Muir, Lindsay Davis, asking questions of these two candidates, and we'll be, again, some blocks away watching it all unfold. And then there's a spin floor in this room to my right where surrogates from both these candidates will come out and field questions from us reporters after that. Look, this is a crucial moment. As you point out so rightly, it may be the only debate between these two candidates before Election Day, and I think both of them understand the seriousness and the opportunity that presents to them here in Philadelphia. You look at Donald Trump and his campaign and how they're framing this. They really want to make sure that the voter sees Vice President Harris as a continuation candidate, that this would be like Joe Biden winning once again. The policies are fundamentally the same. Of course, the vice president pushes back on that. She paying very close attention, I'm sure, to the results of that most recent poll from Siena College and the New York Times, showing that there are still many Americans across this country who don't know well who she is, what she stands for, what policies she would put in place. So this is, again, perhaps the only opportunity to have a debate with former President Trump for her, and a huge opportunity for her to kind of introduce herself anew to the American electorate, Joe.
You do wonder, David, how many blanks we're going to fill in tonight. For those of you with us on YouTube, you're getting a feast of visuals from that spin room with a real sense of the filing center that comes with the surrogates who are going to be talking to media outlets. If you're with us on the radio, you're getting a sense here, thanks to David, of what this is going to look like after the fact. This is the room where all the surrogates gather, talk to media outlets, and try to literally spin, as it's known, some of the things that were said, maybe even clean up or walk back some of the other things that were said, depending on the moment or the campaign. To that end, David, while you're with us, the rules are the same as they were the first debate when you brought us to Atlanta, despite Kamala Harris's attempt to have mics unmuted. We're going to play by the same rules tonight, right?
She knows well how powerful that moment was when she faced Mike Pence on the debate stage in her last big marquee debate. And she twice interrupted him to say that she was speaking. That went viral, became a huge moment in that debate. Her campaign hoping she could have had an opportunity to have another moment like that by being able to interject with her mic on. But after many weeks of a debate of a different stripe, trying to figure out the rules for this debate, they settled back on those rules from Atlanta. So the mic will be off when the other candidate is speaking. That said, of course, one could interrupt the other, react to the other. We could see that, not be able to hear it, but there could be a moment or something that comes out of one razzing the other over the course of the debate. And just to pick up on what you were saying about the spin room and the surrogates here, such a strange moment after that last debate when I think Democrats recognized, surrogates recognized, it certainly did not go the way that the incumbent president, President Biden, wanted it to go. And there was this long delay where Republicans descended on the spin room floor. They were available. They were talking to us. They were fielding questions from reporters. It took a good 10 or 15 minutes before we saw any Democrats come out to field questions. So my sense is that will be the thing that's different tonight. Now, who knows how the debate will go, but I think that it'll be a more boisterous spin room floor from both sides after the debate tonight.
Fascinating color from inside the spin room, and a story you could only tell having been there. David Gura, thank you so much, David. We'll meet you a little bit later on. He'll be back in our second hour of Balance of Power and will be featured prominently this evening in our special coverage. That begins at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Bloomberg. Now, you cannot have a debate day without Laura Davison at the desk. This is the person who's editing our coverage, and of course, a familiar voice and a reassuring one to a lot of us here on this program. Laura, it's great to see you. Happy debate day. Feels a little differently than the first one did, doesn't it?
Well, at this point in the day, it's kind of the same vibe. You know, remember going into the last debate, the Biden people, were convinced that they were going to win, that the State of the Union Biden was going to show up.
Yeah,
obviously, that didn't happen, as David was just talking about. In the spin room after the debate, it took about 10 minutes for all the Democrats to come out. They came out in one big group, one by one, said something, and then left. It was a very, funeral-like feeling. We'll see how this debate goes tonight. Harris has been hunkered down preparing for the past week in Pittsburgh. She's known for her sharp lines of attack, but she's also known sometimes for kind of getting into a little bit of word salad. So while, we expect, tens of millions of people to tune in for the full debate and watch, a good chunk of it, there's also a big audience that will watch it on social media, little 30-second clips, days to come, and that could really also change the perception of what happened on stage.
I suppose that's a criticism or an observation you could make about both of them when it comes to word salad here. But Laura, I want to talk to you, and our listeners want to hear from you about how a pro watches this debate. You're tasked with covering this and bringing to our subscribers and our listeners and readers the most important elements here, the stuff that's going to actually matter for this race. And that could be style or substance. So give us your glasses in the way you're going to be looking at this tonight.
I would say look for the style, not the substance.
Okay.
There's probably not going to be any new policy outlines. A lot of the things that they're talking about, they may have kind of come up with an even more powerful way to talk about them, but sort of the content will be the same. What both candidates want is to have that viral moment, that that really that attack line that lands, that really both appeals to their base, but also the center, those persuadable, very small slice of voters. The thing that kind of polls time and time again, our poll, the New York Times poll from over the weekend, the economy is going to be the defining issue for people who haven't decided. So what are they talking about on prices, on housing, on taxes, and how they both talk about the policy, but also how they relate to people in Pennsylvania who are making up their mind.
And avoid details while they're at it, right? A lot of folks, and David Gura referred to this, have been looking to fill some blanks on exactly just to sort of round out the economic policy proposals that both campaigns have. Short on details so far. That doesn't change tonight, it sounds like.
I highly doubt we're going to get, sort of a new tax table or some sort of a new tariff schedule.
Well, how about something like a tax on unrealized capital gains, right? Wall Street is asking over and over about this and not getting an answer.
And that's the kind of thing that Harris would love to never talk about. It's something that the Biden administration has endorsed. It's been in policy papers for years after year. However, but this has been a controversial thing. She's actually rolled back some of Biden's capital gains proposals. Biden had wanted to raise it to almost 40%. She said, hey, let's do it to 28%. The current rate is about 20%. So she's trying to position herself more as a moderate. When Doug Emhoff, her husband, is out talking at these high-dollar fundraisers, he's talking about her as a pro-capitalism, pro-business president, and that's the message she wants to convey right now.
Who owns the spin room tonight? David makes a great point. It was Trump heaven after the first debate. We didn't even see a Democratic surrogate for some time as they tried to kind of recalibrate after that difficult performance. I suspect that they will potentially overcorrect on that front tonight.
We may see a little bit more, joyousness, and they may, sort of flood the zone. The thing that's tricky is how do you talk to both sort of the cable news viewers that skew a little bit older, that are kind of more interested in policy, but also, and what the Harris campaign has done really well of taking some of these moments that some people have perceived as weird, the coconut tree comment, for example, of my mom talking about you just fell out of the coconut tree, and been able to spin that into something that's now a meme that is people supportive of Harris are posting all these coconut photos. So this is, and that you really have, 30 minutes to kind of make that pivot there of how do we, spin something that may have been a negative or may have been sort of an awkward moment and, correct and put some sort of, happy warrior behind it.
Yeah. You're bringing in dinner for the troops tonight. It's going to be a late one, right?
It'll be Chinese food.
Chinese food tonight. Wow. That's some inside information. I didn't even know that. Laura, thank you so much. We'll be in this together. Laura Davison, watch for her team and, of course, her great work in editing on the terminal and online, Bloomberg Politics editor, as we keep the bead on the economy here. This is something, of course, we're all at Bloomberg going to be watching and listening for very closely. And we want to get a sense, now that we have the politics editor telling us what to watch, what are the markets watching for tonight? What are they listening for? Let's see this through the prism of Wall Street with the help of Abigail Doolittle, of course, Bloomberg Markets correspondent with us now in New York. Abigail, can we begin? And I don't mean to get too cute on this, but how does the investor watch this differently than someone else?
I would say that investors are probably looking to see how much substance will be in this debate. I don't know that there's anything right now that we're watching too particularly. Maybe the tax issue, given the fact that the 2017 tax cuts will roll off next year. Both candidates have talked about what they might do. Kamala Harris is in favor of keeping it lower than what it might be with President Biden or where it would naturally go. President Trump has floated the idea of 15%, so making it even lower. So I would say that's the macro issue that investors could be watching most broadly. And then, of course, capital gains, that will be interesting as well. From a policy standpoint, though, for the average American, and I think that that's one way to really think about it, given the fact that 66% or 2/3 of the economy is GDP. I think that we're just looking for substance. We're looking for policy. It's interesting. The markets right now are rolling over a little bit. It doesn't have so much to do with the debate. I would say that earlier when the markets were just up a little bit, that was probably more reflective of the uncertainty to see what will these candidates say. Will it be a productive conversation or is it going to be show business?
Well, these are all great questions that we can't wait to answer here. But you mentioned capital gains. We do know where Kamala Harris is. Not quite at the highest level that Joe Biden was looking for. Made a little bit of news last week with this idea of essentially 30, not 40% capital gains on the highest earners. But unrealized capital gains, Abigail, this is kind of a deal breaker for Wall Street, right? This would reset the table for the financial markets. And if Laura is correct, Laura Davison, we're not getting an answer on that tonight.
Well, I think that that's the interesting thing about this debate. I don't know what we will actually get answers for. I think that what people might be watching for the most is to see, because I have heard, I don't know if this is true, but that Kamala Harris, VP Harris, and Donald Trump, the former president, they've never crossed paths before. So just in terms of what will it be like as they communicate, are they going to be sparring? Are they going to actually be speaking? Again, will it be a productive conversation? I think that that's really the number one thing. If we actually get information, whether it has to do with capital gains taxes, unrealized, realized, tax policy, healthcare, education, that would be really a bonus. But one thing that does stand out is you're talking about taxes and finance really is the bank complex. That's one reason that we have stocks down. And I think it's important to mention this only because it's one of the biggest money center banks in the world, maybe the largest. JP Morgan right now down about 7%, the worst day in quite some time. And this after President Daniel Pinto said that analysts are expecting too much for next year in terms of their net interest income. Why that stands out, Joe, and why that's important is it's a pretty significant signal in the idea that maybe this economy is cooling a little bit. I think that it would be nice to see these candidates talk about inflation, quite frankly, since that has been a tax on all of us for a couple of years.
How true. I think we're going to have to hear about inflation. Energy is another question I have as we watch Texas crude fall below $66 a barrel here. Speaking of the side effects of a slowdown, Abigail, it's always great to connect the dots with you on politics and the markets. If you can come back tomorrow, let us know how this played. It would be great to have you back. Bloomberg Markets correspondent Abigail Doolittle with her eyes on Wall Street for us here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we are just getting started, clearly, and a lot more to follow here. Nathan Dean is going to join us coming up. Dad is back from Bloomberg Intelligence. We have a lot to talk about from Basel III with breaking news in the past 24 hours from Bloomberg. What to watch tonight and odds on a government shutdown. Nobody's watching it yet, but yes, the government will run out of money September 30. We'll see if a solution will follow. And it's all ahead on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks in the red, very close to session lows right now, with the S&P down by 20 points to 54.50 for the S&P, a decline right now of 0.4%. The Dow in the red by 364 points, down by 0.9%. The Nasdaq Composite Index right now lower by 49 points, a decline of 0.3%. 10-year at 3.65%, the 2-year 3.61%. Gold up $5.50 the ounce to $25.11, up 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude now down 4.4%, $65.70 a barrel. Brent crude down 3.9%, $69.07 for a barrel of Brent. Volkswagen is ending job protections for auto workers in Germany as part of a cost-cutting push, setting up a showdown with unions as the country's most important industry fights for its future. ADRs of Volkswagen down now by 3.9%. And BMW, meanwhile, has had to lower expectations for the year after a faulty braking system from supplier Continental prompted a recall and halt to deliveries of some 1.5 million vehicles. ADRs of BMW plunging by 11.4%. Again, recapping, stocks lower. S&P right now down 0.2%, lower by down actually by 0.4%, down 22 points. 10-year yield 3.65%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host here is Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much with his eye on the markets for us, always keeping us honest. What would we do without Charlie Pellet? He'll be back in just a few to keep tabs on Wall Street today. It's not been great as we work our way up to the big debate tonight. Not that that's what everyone is trading on here, but the uncertainty around the policy proposals from Kamala Harris, probably a bit more than Donald Trump, a more known entity, is very real and something we're talking about today as we anticipate, hopefully, some more details from both, particularly on their economic proposals. Now, I know that Taylor Swift has been a big theme this year politically, culturally, but I want you to put the Eras Tour down, okay? Forget about Beyonce. What is that? What's the name of Beyonce's tour, James? Renaissance Tour? The Renaissance Tour, yeah. Because fresh off his tour of India and the subcontinent is Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence U.S. policy senior analyst. I'm not making this up. This guy is on an international tour. Ever since Kamala Harris went to the top of the ticket, the interest from our subscribers, from his clients, terminal subscribers like you and others around the world, want to talk to Nathan Dean because nobody knows what's going to come next. We get to talk to him every week around here, and it's nice for you to stop by in Washington for a minute. Your poor family.
Thanks for having me.
What country are you, city are you just back from?
I was in Toronto.
Toronto. I'm not making this up, right? No. How many speeches, how many sessions do you have scheduled since the change in the ticket?
I mean, like, I can't even count. But look, I mean, but the reason being is, to your point, I mean, you know, people, I think, have an understanding where the Trump 2.0 president would be like.
Okay.
But the Kamala Harris administration is still somewhat of an enigma. I mean, really, you know, you can say that as vice president, she's supported by President Biden's policies, but even then, we're still just trying to figure out exactly what a Harris presidency would look like. And so a lot of the client questions come about that.
Well, it's pretty hard to answer them when the campaign hasn't told you a lot, right?
Well, yes, but I mean, we can think of certain themes. I mean, obviously, we think the Biden era regulatory, you know, regime, if you will, would continue on. Basel III Endgame could be an example of that. But, you know, she's made a lot of talk about being tougher on consumer-facing sectors. Think of this price gouging talk that she did in a speech a couple of weeks ago. You know, she wanted to go after bad actors. This is something that she did as Attorney General. So we've been looking at some of the consumer-facing sectors like retail, grocery stores, and so forth like that, and then trying to boil down, is there a real risk here? And for the most part, you know, a lot of this is just that the campaign style, we don't actually think that risk will translate into true risk for equities because you either need an act of Congress, which is not easy, or by going after bad actors, you have to identify a company that is a bad actor. And if I were to get an equity, you know, a publicly traded company CEO or investor relations on the phone, they'd say, no, we're not a bad actor. And so, you know, I think it's just one of those things where it sounds great, you know, on the campaign trail, and it may appeal to voters, but for those of us in the markets, it's pretty low risk.
Interesting that you point out it would take an act of Congress, because much of what Donald Trump is proposing, specifically when it comes to tariffs, he could do on his own, right? Much of what Kamala Harris is proposing would essentially require a Democratic sweep of Capitol Hill.
That's right. I mean, so if you think of 2025 in phase one and phase two, phase one, if Trump wins, could be the executive order tariff argument.
Yep.
You know, I would argue about 85% of executive orders are fancy ways of the president picking up the phone and saying to his or her staff, do something via legislation or regulation. But the power of the presidency is a lot more powerful when it comes to foreign policy and tariffs and so forth. So there is a real threat or opportunity, depending on who you are, you know, of this tariff coming in the first half of next year. Then comes the tax argument, because the Trump-era tax cuts expire next year. That will take an act of Congress. If President Trump has the House and the Senate, he can use reconciliation, bypass the Democrats. Now, if you start with the assumption that the Republicans could potentially take the Senate, you know, it's going to be a very difficult race for the Democrats to keep the Senate. They can certainly do it, but if the Republicans have the Senate, Kamala Harris, as president, is going to have to negotiate. So a lot of her campaign vows and so forth like that, if they're the legislative route, are going to have to be constricted, restrained, and potentially negotiated on with Republicans.
Before I keep going, by this is why we have Nathan Dean. Is this great? Before I keep going, do you expect additional policy details tonight, or that's like a comedy routine for you? It's a televised debate, and we're told it's style, not substance.
So I'm not expecting it, but I wouldn't be surprised either, because if you look over the weekend, President Trump, you know, made a Truth Social point about supporting marijuana.
Yes.
You know, in favor of the Safer Banking Act, reschedulization, something that, you know, I wouldn't argue is very much at the, you know, it's not something you normally would see presidential candidates talk about,
No,
but, you know,
the Republican.
But when you're talking about the margin of victory for this election is going to be in the tens of thousands, if not 100,000, every single issue counts. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a mention of marijuana or a mention of some small issue, just as in like a, you know, as an appeal to try and get those individual voters, because every single voter counts in this election.
Well, it's really interesting you mention this, because we've talked about rescheduling a lot, and you've been ahead on a lot of the reporting on this. We can say now, I guess, that no matter who wins, rescheduling is on the agenda. Donald Trump is also backing safe banking, which we've also talked a lot about, allowing cannabis companies in states that have legalized to use actual banking services. Does his endorsement unlock this at last on Capitol Hill? It's passed the House like a half a dozen times or something.
So it certainly opens the door to it, but I wouldn't say it's a tier one issue. Like, I wouldn't expect that President Trump wins, that come February of 2025, rescheduling is going to happen.
Okay.
Because remember, you know, we've heard anecdotally and also through Bloomberg News reporting that there's a lot of staffers over at the DEA that aren't on board with this.
Right.
And it's one thing to say it in a campaign speech, it's another thing to move forward with it. I'm not saying that they wouldn't do it, but I'm just saying maybe it's not going to happen in the first 90 days or the first 100 days of the presidency. When it comes to the Safer Banking Act, the votes are there, but there's still just a little bit of naysayers in the Senate that, you know, this bill would allow banks to service marijuana businesses. There's still a couple of folks in the Senate that need to get on board with this. You know, they probably will still be there. And so then it becomes, what are they going to get in return? How do you negotiate this? Does it get attached to a funding bill? So I think the odds certainly would go up to 60 to 70% chances of the next Congress, but not something I want to jump and say, hey, it's going to happen in the first 100 days.
Enter Basel III. I don't know if I should have started with this, but we've been talking about all these issues for so long. This is just one big throwdown with Nathan Dean. Big deal here. Get your T-shirts out. We were talking about Basel III T-shirts. James says big 9% on the back. You'd want one of those, right?
I would always take one of those.
Yeah, we have to make one for Nathan too, James. This is important reporting. Katanga Johnson here at Bloomberg. Regulators will make extensive changes to their bank capital rules proposal by basically cutting the number in half, Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't just cut it in half. They also retreated way back from where it was originally proposed. So the original proposal was a 19% increase in capital requirements for the GSIBs, Bank of America's, JP Morgan. That's now 9%. But if you even look at the regional banks, originally it was 5 to 6% increase for banks above 100 billion in assets. Today, under the new plan, banks that are below 250 billion in assets actually get out. There's no more Basel III for them, except for a small provision related to unrealized gains and losses. So you're looking at a 0.5% increase in capital for those banks between 100 to 250 billion in assets. For the PNCs, the Truists, and the Capital Ones out there, you're now looking at 3 to 4%. And we haven't even talked about like the market risk, the credit risk, and the operational risk provisions. You know, not to get too technical, there's a significant rollback for this plan, and you know, we think this proposal is going to come out in the next few weeks. Than the original. And so what they did is there was so much, I think, I don't want to say opposition. There was so much opposition amongst the banking industry, Republicans, and even moderate Democrats that this was, I think, the Fed's way of saying, don't sue us on this.
Yeah.
We are giving you essentially what you want, and we're going to move forward.
So the banks won. Is that the headline?
Well, I think the banks certainly got a lot of what they wanted, but when you see these comment letters come out, it's going to be a 60-day comment period. When you see the comment letters come out, don't be surprised from the banks that they even have a little bit more issues with the bank, with some of the risk weightings, because there are folks out there that think that this rule doesn't exist, and that's one of the biggest questions we have is, even if the big banks are on board with this, there could be a smaller bank out there, say in the Fifth Circuit of Louisiana or Texas, and all of a sudden you file suit and it goes to the courts and goes to the Fifth Circuit. Could this rule even survive? So that's one of the questions of, will the banks actually be happy with this, or will the banks actually decide to move forward and sue? We just don't know. We're going to see it when the proposal comes out, and we'll see in those comment letters.
What does Trump think about this?
Well, that's
has he weighed in? Did he talk about that at the Economic Club? Or?
No, he hasn't weighed in on this, but this is something that President Trump could effectively stop if he decides to, because it's a 3-agency rule. It's the Fed, the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and the FDIC. Now, if President Trump wins, the folks at the Fed are still going to be there, but the OCC and the FDIC will likely flip. And the new acting comptroller of the OCC on day one could just say, I'm out of this. And next thing you know, you would have one of the 3 agencies say, no, we're not moving forward. And the Basel III endgame is effectively delayed, which is why I think some of the international jurisdictions like the UK have delayed their capital increases as a result.
Fascinating. This is why they're all calling Nathan Dean. Okay, last one on my agenda for you is Capitol Hill. We run out of money September 30th. Everyone says we can't shut down an election. No one's going to want to go home and talk about shutting down the government. But there's no solution right now. And the rule that passed committee last evening includes the SAVE Act, which is a non-starter for Democrats. So have we seen this movie before? We ping-pong back and forth. Chuck Schumer jams the House, and then we kick the can and stay open.
We get really close to the deadline. The Senate does what they do. They send a bill over to the House. The House, just gets stuck.
Got no choice.
And then they sign it and they move on, because nobody wants to shut a government down. We're at 20% odds. Nobody wants to shut
20%.
20%.
Yeah, so that is the conventional wisdom is wise in this case.
And we just don't think it's going to happen. And even if it were to happen, it would just be a day or two, because, I don't think anybody wants to be seen, shutting the government down. And remember, Congress isn't here in October. They all have races that they need to run.
Right.
And they don't want to stick around when their opposition is out back home saying, so-and-so is in Washington not getting the job done. So I think most of it's going to shut down, most of it's not going to shut down. They'll get a deal done and they'll kick the can.
Our last minute here, the idea of taxing unrealized capital gains, not likely to get much talk tonight. Maybe Donald Trump will bring it up. I don't know. Is that the deal breaker? Is that the poison pill for Wall Street when it comes to Kamala Harris?
It could be. Obviously, we saw Kamala Harris come out and say that she doesn't support moving to President Biden's position on that. I certainly...
On unrealized gains?
Yes.
Or just capital gains?
Well, I think that position is still evolving. We haven't really seen concrete language on that. And so I think you could see a mention of it, but we'll see.
What's the next city you're in?
Philly.
Philly. Hey, swing state. All right. James has updated the T-shirt order. We're in good stead. Basel III, 9%. We could make a fortune on this, James, I'm pretty sure. Buy the URL during the break. Nathan Dean, thank you. At Bloomberg Intelligence, our panel's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are getting hit after cautious outlooks from some of Wall Street's biggest banks. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red right now, with the S&P down 15 to 54.54. A drop now of 0.3%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 338 points, down 0.8%. NASDAQ is down 22, a decline of 0.1%. 10-year 3.66%, the 2-year 3.62%. Spot gold up $7 the ounce to $25.13, up 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil now down by 4.5%, $65.59 a barrel on WTI. Brent crude is now below $69 a barrel, down by 4%. Right now, we have got J.P. Morgan Chase shares dropping 6.7%. They are down the most in more than 4 years after President Daniel Pinto said analysts are being too optimistic in projecting next year's expenses and net interest income. Other banks being hit as well. Goldman Sachs down 5.3%. Citigroup now down by 4.6%. Bank of America down 2.7%. There has been a stumble in small business confidence in America's economy. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Small business optimism dropped in August by the most since June 2022. Earnings are tumbling and firms are downbeat about prospects for sales in the U.S. economy as elevated prices, interest rates, and labor costs continue to take a toll. Last month's drop in the Small Business Optimism Index erased nearly half the advance for the previous 4 months. The data are compiled by the National Federation for Independent Business. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Among the names scheduled to report earnings after the close of trading today, we'll be hearing from GameStop, Dave & Buster's Entertainment, and Petco. Petco's ticker, by the way, WOOF, W-O-O-F. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, thank you. And thanks for being with us on the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. A salute to our listeners on 92.9 in Boston. I hope you're working this into your routine because we're glad to be there with you. Satellite radio and YouTube included. Search Bloomberg Business News Live if you want to find us here in the studio anytime on YouTube. Thanks for joining. It's debate day. This is the big stuff, the Super Bowl of politics. Remembering the impact the first debate had on this campaign. Probably won't see that again tonight. But the numbers, the viewership, those listening and watching around the world should be huge. As we've heard from both Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature panel, this in fact could be the most important day between now and November. Philadelphia. We'll be joined by David Gura coming up at the top of the hour in our second hour on Balance of Power, because Bloomberg is mobilized with special coverage set to begin at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And yes, our signature panel will be with us. They're here right now with me in Washington at the desk. Jeannie Shanzano, what a pleasure. Bloomberg politics contributor, of course, and political science professor at Iona University. Rick Davis here too, Bloomberg politics contributor partner at Stone Court Capital. So here we are. We made it, Jeannie, and I wonder your thoughts, knowing that Kamala Harris has been hunkered down for days, watching tape, getting ready for an experience that she's never had before. As we discussed yesterday, sharing the stage with arguably the most experienced debater, might not think of it that way, but is, in presidential general election history. The stakes couldn't be higher, right?
They could not be. This is going to be the largest audience she might have in the next less than 60 days now until the election. And of course, I think the stakes are high for Kamala Harris, a bit higher than Donald Trump, because she's really not as well known as Donald Trump. And, you know, I was looking at some of the latest polls. At least NPR is saying 7 out of 10 of the people they polled saying they will watch the debate, and 3 out of 10 saying it may change their mind or help them decide who they're going to vote for. We'll see if that comes to fruition, but those are big, big numbers and big stakes on both sides. And of course, Joe, I can't be a debate day unless I say happy debate day. And
yes,
I come down to see you and Rick and Kaylee
to think
in
you're here
DC.
in person for this. We've got a long day and a big night ahead, and thank God that both of you are here. Rick, I don't know if you see it that way. Is the job really cut out for Kamala Harris this evening, Donald Trump being the known quantity here?
Yeah, I think there's a limit to what the upside or the downside is for Donald Trump. His base is secure. It's where he is today. He doesn't have much appeal beyond that. He's kind of hoping to win at 47, right? I mean, that's kind of, where he's been since this campaign started. And even though the Democratic side has seen massive swings and changes in the candidacy, he's been pretty much where he's been all along. So he's not expecting much on the outcome here. If anything, he'll focus all his time and attention not on his own plans and policies, but on attacking Kamala Harris, who's sort of the new candidate on the block for him. He's not really invested heavily in defining her, and I suspect he'll do that tonight. Kamala Harris has exactly the opposite problem. She's got to not only establish herself as a candidate and a potential president of the United States, which she's behind in getting that done. So tonight's a great opportunity for her to catch up. But also, she'll have to deal with a aggressive Donald Trump. And how she does that, I think, is going to be really the secret to her success if she is going to be able to sound like she's won this debate tonight.
So the bar, it seems, is clearly higher for the vice president. Tim O'Brien, writing for Bloomberg Opinion, is out with his 7 tips for Harris to win the debate. Interesting, knowing Tim has tangled with Donald Trump for years and is clearly in Kamala Harris's corner. Number 1, I won't walk through them all. Number 1, respect the split screen. The camera will be on the candidates for a full 90 minutes. Even when they are not speaking, they will be watched. Isn't that something Joe Biden failed at in the first debate?
Oh, absolutely.
Staring off into space.
And don't we remember the famous watch stare?
Sure,
So you absolutely.
It speaks to this foreign environment that they're put in, though. They'll both be facing this, but it's the first time for her.
It's the first time for her at this level. We should say she has debated as vice president. She has, or in a vice presidential race, she has debated as a candidate for the presidency on the Democratic side. But absolutely, this is her first time at this level. But I think that is a really good piece of advice by Tim. I think for Kamala Harris, I think the number one thing she has to do in addition to introducing herself is she has got to differentiate herself from Joe Biden and show that she is turning the page on this election. She needs to be forward-looking. She needs to be presidential to give some of those moderate voters who are still undecided the opportunity to give her a look and say, we can see you as president, and we're not going to see a repeat of the Biden presidency, which, as we know from the latest polling, is not particularly popular. And so, to me, that's what she has to do. And of course, I think in the choice of a vice presidential running mate, she may have missed a step on this point. And so she's going to have to do it again so she doesn't look like she is left of Joe Biden. That's going to be a big problem for her if that's how this comes out.
I heard an important observation earlier from Stephen Portnoy, the White House correspondent. Rick, we've made note of the fact that these two individuals have never met. This will be their first time not only debating, but first time meeting each other. And I can ask you both whether they should shake hands. That's another matter. But Portnoy reminds us the reason why they've never met each other is because Donald Trump refused to show up for the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Rick, should she remind him of that tonight?
I think she'll use some moments to try and get into his head. They've actually done a great job as a campaign of trolling Donald Trump. The question is, will she do much of that tonight? I mean, as we've been talking, she's got a lot to do herself. And we know that engaging with Donald Trump is a slippery slope, right? He has always gotten the better of his opponents on this kind of stage when they've tried to engage in the same kind, if not aggressive behavior with him. And so I think this is a bet that they'll likely make. I would go out on a limb to say that I think she's not going to want to tangle with him very much and use this moment to really embed her image, her future governance of the country, her differentiation in this campaign as much as she can and not get tangled up with the beast. He's like an octopus. Just when you shake his hand, he's grabbing you around the neck. So, it's not something I think that she should take lightly. And I know her advisors are concerned with that dynamic.
Candidates haven't shaken hands since 2016, I read this morning. Should they?
I
We
wish,
don't do that anymore.
I guess they don't. I wish they would. We need civility back in this process. And, you know, I don't think we should forget that Donald Trump has some work to do here as well. You know, thinking about the fact that he is debating a woman, the second woman, and he obviously debated the first and Hillary Clinton. That was a memorable debate. But he has some work to do on issues like reproductive health, women's rights, you know, speaking to a lot of young people, particularly women. This is the number one issue on their mind. So as much work as she has to do on the economy and on immigration and other issues, he has work to do in that arena as well. So I think he's going to have to be very cognizant of the fact that he does address his very difficult to understand view on some of those reproductive rights, which has really hurt him in the polls with women and particularly young women.
Yeah, this will be something we're watching and listening for closely. Now, I'm supposed to ask both of you guys about this big batch of polls we got today. I think I was supposed to talk about it this whole time. Where do you want to start? 19th News, Survey Monkey, Harris has a 3-point lead over Trump. Morning Consult, Harris with a 3-point lead over Trump, 49-46. Same lead, identical, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they're tied in North Carolina. I'll keep going if you want. Main Street Research USA, Trump with a slight lead in Georgia and North Carolina. Quinnipiac, Trump up in Georgia by 4. You're a polling expert and a political scientist. This is all essentially within the margin. Is the story not that this is a statistical tie?
The story is this is a statistical dead heat, and it has been for some time. In my view, the race has not changed much. She got a slight blip as she came in. Now it is back to where it was, a dead heat, and that speaks volumes. So the inundation with all these really good polls, particularly the Morning Consult, they all tell the same story. Nothing has moved this much, despite the billions of dollars they have raised at this point.
How are you reading these numbers today, Rick? Is there anything to learn here?
Yeah, well, I would say a lot has moved. I mean, Donald Trump hasn't moved, as I said before. He's still pretty much where he started the election, with the same kind of voters that he started the election with. Non-college whites living outside of the urban areas, suburbs and exurbs and rural areas. And his numbers are static for the last year and a half. I would say there's a significant change on the Democratic side. I mean, Joe Biden wasn't getting anywhere near his base. He was below 80% on Democratic voters. Kamala Harris now has that up above 94%. And so the base came home, and that fixed a problem with young black men and Hispanics. But now she's got issues with, older white, non-college educated people in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania. And she's got some challenges with and opportunities with younger voters and diverse voters in the South. So I think the dynamic of this election has shifted. The road to the White House for the Democrats was through the blue wall, and now the road to the White House may be through the Rust Belt, or through the Sun Belt.
Well, it's a perfect analysis since Joe Biden dropped out of the race, Rick. I should have been a little more specific, say maybe since the convention. We've seen these numbers since it's been established that Kamala Harris has turned this race around. They really haven't moved a lot. And I don't know, Jeannie, if you see them moving tonight. But when I get back to Tim O'Brien here, the column, the 7 pieces of advice, remember what swing state voters want. And he points out the economy tops their lists. Does Kamala Harris have to explain how she will do more than Joe Biden to lower prices?
She absolutely does, and she has to differentiate herself from Joe Biden. Even putting out the issues that they put out about 48 hours ago didn't go far enough, in my mind, to do that. Obviously, this is not a policy-driven election at this point. It's more personality. But for those voters that you're talking about, Tim is talking about, she has to say, this is what we're going to do on the cost of living, important issues like housing. And she started to go there. But if voters see her as more of the same as Joe Biden, it's going to be a problem for her in these really key swing states where this thing is going to be decided.
Does she risk in that world, Rick, giving us a policy white paper a la Joe Biden in the first debate, showering us with numbers?
Yeah, I doubt it. I think that they've been very strategic about the economic plans, like these first-time home buyer giveaways. That's for Sun Belt young voters who she's moving up the list with and sees as her election victory group. So I think they'll just hammer away at what we already know. I would be stunned if anything new happens tonight. I think that what you saw this week of her posting her policies on her website was an effort to basically bolster what she's doing tonight.
There you have it from someone who's prepared a candidate for this very event. Presidential general election debate tonight. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis will be with us with our special coverage. I hope you will be too. Starts 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We're just getting started on Balance of Power. More ahead on Bloomberg.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Could be the most important day of the campaign, debate day for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as we count down to the face-off tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington as we prepare for special coverage here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kaylee, big questions about whether we'll hear any details on actual policy tonight.
Well, certainly questions about that will be asked. The question is actually what we will get in response. The answers from each of these candidates who, of course, are meeting tonight for the first time. They never actually have met in person as they prepare to make history on the debate stage in Philadelphia this evening. And what we have learned over the course of what has been an incredible presidential campaign, unlike any we've ever seen before, is one debate does have the power to alter the course of history.
That's for sure.
Literally, if we think back to the last time Donald Trump was debating, it was a different candidate, Joe Biden, and we all know how that went.
Well, that's right. It turned the race upside down. And of course, they had monster ratings in that first debate, I believe in excess of 50 million viewers. Tonight could be even higher for the very reason that you just roll out here, is for the fact that they've never met. Interesting, the White House correspondent Stephen Portnoy reminds us they have never met because Donald Trump refused to attend the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Yeah, because he didn't accept the results of that election. It'll be interesting to see if he is pressed again, as he was in the first debate, as to whether or not he is willing to accept the results of this one, to pre-commit to that. He, of course, has suggested in the past he only will if it's free and fair. But of course, that's not the only question we're expecting. The candidates will be asked tonight, economic policy in particular, given it is so high on the minds of voters, likely to be front and center.
You said it. We've got our signature panel with us today, and we're moving them up to the head of the line here because we want to hear from Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. They'll be with us tonight, and they set the baseline for us, expectations and what to watch later, right here on Balance of Power.
And of course, Bloomberg's own David Gura is live in Philadelphia. We'll get to him in just a moment. But first, we head up to New York with a check on the markets. Charlie Pellet has that for us. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much. No debate about it. Lower across the board, long day ahead for you guys. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index. I'll throw in the Russell 2000 as well. All lower across the board right now. Stocks are getting hit after a cautious outlook from some of Wall Street's biggest banks. The S&P right now down 12, drop of 0.2%. Dow Industrials down 286, a decline of 0.7%. NASDAQ down 8, a drop there of just under 0.1%. 10-year 3.66%, with a 2-year that's now yielding 3.61%. Spot gold trading higher by 0.3%, 25.14 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 4.5% now, 65.63 on WTI. Brent trading just above $69 a barrel, 69.02, down now by 3.9%. I alluded to the banks. Case in point, J.P. Morgan Chase selling off now by 6.8%. We've got Oracle, though, at a record, up 11.5% after the software giant reported profit and bookings that topped estimates. And briefly, Southwest Airlines Chairman Gary Kelly is stepping down, along with 6 directors. It is a dramatic step after the carrier faced calls for a strategic overhaul from activist investor Elliott Investment Management. Southwest shares down now by 3.3%. So again, recapping, stocks now trading mixed. NASDAQ back in the green, barely up less than 0.1%. S&P lower by 9, down by about 0.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now or wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee alongside Joe here in Washington. And of course, right in between those two cities on the eastern seaboard is where you find Philadelphia. Of course, in a critical swing state in this election, Pennsylvania, and also the location of this first and potentially only debate we will see between the two presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, who, of course, right now are in their final preparations before they get ready to take that stage at 9 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, the Amtrak corridor looming large tonight. I guess Donald Trump making his way up from Florida, I believe. Kamala Harris from Pittsburgh, where she's been for the last, I guess, half week or so, preparing. Two very different preparation styles, as we saw in the first debate here. So a lot of questions about style over substance and who brings what. Of course, you know it's a big deal when David Gura is on the site and our asset has made his way to Philadelphia. In fact, he's in the spin room right now, where things start pretty early there. David, it's great to see you. We know that Republicans and Democrats will be using that room you're standing in to try to spin everything that is said, walk things back, try to reinforce points later on. Of course, all of that follows the debate that starts at 9 o'clock. Give us the lay of the land.
Yeah, so we're in the media filing center. The spin room is just over my shoulder, and I think it's a more traditional media filing center and spin room than we had at the last debate. That, of course, took place in the basketball arena for Georgia Tech, so a very different feel, very different atmosphere. And then, of course, the way that debate unfolded led to a very strange half hour or so after that debate when surrogates came out to talk to reporters after it concluded. This is, like that last debate, stands to be incredibly important. I think both candidates recognize that. You mentioned the means by which they've been preparing for this. We know that Kamala Harris has been in Pittsburgh, holed up in that Omni Hotel, going through a lot of policy preparation, doing the kind of mock debates that we've seen historically candidates do. Philippe Reines, the Democratic consultant and strategist who played the role of Trump for Hillary Clinton when she ran in 2016, playing that role in those mock debates out in Pittsburgh. Donald Trump choosing to do what he did last time, hold a lot of events, hold a lot of big rallies, and talk about policy with his advisors. We'll see sort of how that preparation comes to bear in the debate that takes place here tonight. I should say, not where I'm standing, not in the convention center, but a few blocks away. So again, kind of strange similarity to Georgia, where we won't be in the actual room. There won't be an audience in the room for the debate itself. It'll be the two candidates on stage, each at a different podium, and those two moderators, David Muir and Lindsay Davis of ABC News, asking the questions and hopefully keeping the trains running on time.
Well, and it's not just the lack of a live audience that makes this more unique compared to presidential debates we've seen in the past, David. It's also muted microphones when it is not the candidate's turn to speak. We saw this tested first on the CNN debate between Trump and Biden back in June. How is that going to be consequential in determining how these candidates conduct themselves, knowing Kamala Harris was pushing back heavily against these rules up until just a few days ago?
Yeah, it was a source of disagreement, as you say, for many weeks. And I think what Vice President Harris wanted to capture was a moment like she had when she was up against Mike Pence, he interrupting her, trying to talk, and she saying quite emphatically, "I'm speaking." And that was a moment that went viral and sort of bolstered her campaign. People really who supported her really thought that was a signal moment in her campaign. You're not going to get that this time around. Again, it's the same rules that we saw in Georgia. And I think what's interesting is what the commentary was like going into that debate in Atlanta. A lot of people thought that would be a detriment to Donald Trump. But again, the circumstances of that debate were so strange and unpredictably so, and it was actually Donald Trump in that debate who was, dare I say, more muted, or not somebody who was interjecting a lot over the course of that debate. Of course, he could do that tonight. The vice president could do that as well. Even if we don't hear what the other candidate has to say, he or she could say something that razzes or kind of needles the other candidate, and that could manifest itself at least in how they react to it on the stage.
All right, Bloomberg correspondent David Gura live in Philadelphia. We'll, of course, be checking in with David all evening and through the night here on Bloomberg TV and radio, as we have many hours of coverage of this presidential debate prepared for you. And of course, with us for the duration is our signature political panel, who is here with us now. Jeannie Shan Zaino of the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, where she is a senior democracy fellow, together with Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner, as well, Republican and Democratic strategist, respectively. Jeannie, I'll start with you, just because it is Kamala Harris, the vice president, who does seem to be coming into the debate with more momentum than Donald Trump has at this time. Does that make the bar even higher for her? Is she actually the one who has the most to lose tonight?
I think that the bar is higher for her because, let's face it, more people are unfamiliar with Kamala Harris. I mean, it's stunning because she's been vice president for 4 years. But that said, a lot of us as Americans, excluding you guys, you've watched politics all the time, you don't have as much attention paid to the vice president normally. So she's less of a known figure. Donald Trump, this is his third run at the White House. He has been president. People know him. Even looking at the latest New York Times poll, you had almost 3 out of 10 people say, or respondents say, that they wanted to learn more about Kamala Harris, and only 9 out of 10 say, or 9 out of 100 saying they wanted to know more about Donald Trump. So the stakes are higher for her in that regard. And of course, he's much more practiced at this, having done this so many times at this level. So I do think the bar is a bit higher for her. And of course, let's not forget the gender factor. For a woman to face Donald Trump, we have seen it before. It is a challenge that she is, I am sure, ready for. I think she's going to do a very good job, but it does change the dynamics. And we've seen this throughout the last 20, 30 years in American politics when men and women face off on the debate stage.
Well, you do wonder which Donald Trump is going to show up tonight. Maybe they all will, Rick. Is this going to be Comrade Kamala, Donald Trump, someone who questions her racial identity? For instance, some of the things that we've heard from him that have offended voters, or is it going to be, look at what I did for the economy? Look at the wall on the southern border, or do we get both?
Well, you know, Donald Trump is good at a debate technique called Gish Gallop, which is, regardless of what the question is, he throws out 5 or 6 different attacks all at the same time and tries to basically get his opponent to buy into that. And of course, Joe Biden did exactly that in the first debate this year. He started responding as much as he could with data to, refute all these outlandish claims that Donald Trump would just throw out there. And we don't know if Donald Trump even believes these claims himself, but when you start actually defending or responding to outlandish claims, you've immediately lost the debate. And so I think that that's what we can expect to see out of Donald Trump. It's a well-honed technique that debaters use, and nobody really knows whether he actually thinks he's doing Gish Gallop or whether he just does it because he's Donald Trump. But the other thing I'd look at is Lindsay Davis, who's one of the moderators. She has a unique standing in this sort of debate with Donald Trump in that he hasn't handled female questioners very well in the past, too. And so I'm dying to see what kind of dynamic gets presented with Lindsay's moderating.
Well, yeah, if we see repeats of past election cycles, like what we saw with Megyn Kelly, for example. Rick, to go back to the kind of Gish Gallop thing you're talking about here, the idea that he does seem to just throw things out there. And in fact, many times, if he's talking about statistics in the border, for example, he'll say, no one knows what the number is. I think it's 20 million. Makes it pretty clear that he's not actually talking based in fact. Knowing he has that proclivity to, if not outright lie frequently, at least misrepresent facts, is that something Kamala Harris needs to be prepared to actually fact check if the moderators don't do so? Or to your point, do you just need to let it slide and make your own points?
Well, we know the moderators aren't going to fact check, right? I mean, that has become the standard with Donald Trump. And when they've tried it in the past, it hasn't gone well. So my guess is they're not in that business, and they'll say so. The reality is when you try to then fact check all these outlandish claims, you then lose all the initiative that you're trying to promote on what you're talking about. So you're just responding to the negative, to the attacks by Donald Trump. So that too isn't necessarily a good debate tactic, to just sort of take his lead, especially when you can't rely on any of the data that he has. And so I think that's something that people are on to. Certainly, if you look at the tape from the Biden debate, you'll realize that he fell into that trap, and he was having other problems related to age, but like he was definitely trying to refute and be the fact checker, and it just wasn't working. There's no wall too high to get over on that one for Donald Trump. So my guess is she stays away from it and uses this opportunity to communicate, her capabilities to the few voters who are still searching around for an alternative to Donald Trump.
We've seen some pretty serious pre-gaming from both campaigns. Donald Trump today rolling out new endorsements from 47 prosecutors. He will, of course, talk about her role as a prosecutor in California. She's out with a new ad following the one yesterday we talked about called The Best People. There's one now featuring Barack Obama's speech at the convention, in which he talked about Donald Trump's obsession with crowd size and the sizes of other things. Is this just par for the course now, Jeannie, or is the object tonight really to get under the skin of your opponent?
I think she should try, and I know Donald Trump will try to get under her skin to get under his skin. And I keep saying this. I have her spend the day watching A Few Good Men. She's a prosecutor. She should be Tom Cruise in that courtroom against Jack Nicholson. And you can't handle the truth, and let him go. Because the more she gets him to say things about the 2020 election being stolen, the 2016 election, his crowd sizes, it reminds people of what this will be like again, which is what they want to do. If Donald Trump wins, this is what you're in for. So I think she should be goading him. We know she's a prosecutor. I have to say, I think it was smart that Trump put out about the prosecutors, that the Trump team did, because she is a prosecutor, and she's well known for having made her case in the Senate as the Attorney General of California. So I am getting my popcorn ready to sit with you guys to watch this. I think it's going to be great. I think it should be, a holiday in the United States, debate day, but it's not. But I think it's going to be fascinating to see how both of them prosecute these cases.
Well, and of course, prosecuting it over the airwaves in advertisements, as well as you allude to, Joe, that's something that costs money, and the money advantage is something that Kamala Harris does have at the moment. Rick, how much of tonight is not just about reaching voters, but about reaching donors. At this point in the race, do those incremental donations, if they can convince more people to pony up the money, does it matter?
Yeah, I think that, as you point out, it's incremental. You don't really need it at this point. Both campaigns have enough to close. Kamala Harris has already made her media buys in most of these states for the balance of the election. And the reality is that money's not going to decide the outcome. So there'll be some money come in because partisans will see their candidates full view tonight. Over 50 million people probably watching, like the first debate. And there'll be some momentum there. But unless there's a knockout blow, I don't think you can expect a big surge of donations. And the reality is it has a marginal impact. This kind of TV time, face-to-face, that's got impact. And I think this could be decisive for the outcome of the election, because I can't see anything else happening between now and Election Day that's going to get this much attention.
Well, Donald Trump, Jeannie, has one very powerful question that he can ask Kamala Harris tonight about every issue that she talks about solving. Why didn't you do anything about it for the last 3.5 years you were in the White House? How does she answer that?
Well, can't she ask him the same question? Why didn't you address these things when you were in the White House?
Well, he'll say things were perfect when I was in the White House.
Why did we take over with the economy the way it was? Why was immigration the way it was? So I think she can respond to that. But you're absolutely right. He is going to be asking that. It is smart on his part, because he wants to tie her to a relatively unpopular Biden presidency. And I do think she has to distinguish herself on that point. She's got to be new, shiny object change candidate and let him be a return to the past. So I think she's going to be prepared to answer those, but that's absolutely, I think, Joe, he's listening. He's going to ask those very questions all night.
We know they're both listening right now, Rick. I'd love to, we only have a minute left, Rick. How would you counsel the candidate to answer that question?
Yeah, look, I think she just ignores him. The reality is, again, engaging him and his attacks has never really worked for anybody who's opposed him. And I think she's just got to stay on her message and talk about the future and just keep saying, if you want to go back, that's a direction I'm not headed in. I'm headed forward. This has been the theme of her entire convention. I think it can reflect well on her. And by the way, the message isn't just, we're not going back to you, Donald Trump. We're not going back to my president, Joe Biden, either. And so it works both ways. And I think that's a safe harbor for her.
All right, you guys, get some rest. We're going to meet back here on the later edition of Balance of Power. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern. And our special coverage, Kaylee, that's at 8 p.m. Eastern
That's
time.
right.
Did you eat your Wheaties?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Extra
We're in for the long
caffeination
haul.
on a day
That's
like
a better
today.
answer.
Caffeine, hydrate, breathe, repeat.
That's good. I'll
on
do
debate
that.
day. This is Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the S&P 500 index recovering from earlier losses right to the numbers because the S&P now unchanged, up barely, up by less than half a point. The Dow does remain lower, down 213, down 0.5%. The Nasdaq Composite Index back in the green, up 0.3%, higher right now by 49 points. 10-year 3.65%, with the 2-year that's yielding 3.60%. Gold up $9 the ounce to $25.15, up by about 0.4%. Oil, a major story today. West Texas Intermediate crude oil dropping 4.1%, $65.87 a barrel, and Brent crude below $70 a barrel. Brent 69.25. The global benchmark down 3.6% today. Stocks lower after a cautious outlook from some of Wall Street's biggest banks. Case in point, JPMorgan Chase down now by 6.4%. Apple shares lower a day after rolling out new products. Apple also lost its court fight over a 13 billion euro Irish tax bill. In the meantime, as I mentioned, we do have stocks trading lower, banks particularly hard hit. JPMorgan Chase, worth repeating, down now by about 6.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a look at the Tuesday trade. Thank you so much. Of course, it's not just any Tuesday, though. It's the Tuesday that brings us potentially the only presidential debate between Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris that we will see this election cycle. We'll have full coverage of it for you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Myself, Kaylee Lyons, alongside Joe Matthew. And what we know, Joe, is that obviously top of mind to the American electorate are more domestic issues, the border and the economy. Yet on that stage tonight, the candidates may have to field a number of foreign policy questions as well when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, China perhaps.
That's right.
And of course, what could be most difficult for the incumbent vice president is questions around Israel and the ongoing war against Hamas.
Knowing the fissures we've seen in the Democratic Party, the outrage in some cases by progressive Democrats, and a needle to thread here for Kamala Harris. Is it the same policy as the Biden administration? Will there be continuity here, or is this a new approach? Donald Trump, I suspect, will suggest as much. And there has been this narrative that Donald Trump would be more friendly, or at least less hard on Benjamin Netanyahu, that they have a better working relationship. Maybe some of this will come up tonight. But you bring up a great point. People typically do not vote on geopolitics, and we could be in a different world in this campaign. That'll be illuminated tonight.
Yeah, and it is worth noting as we talk about the fissures within the Democratic Party, maybe not everyone votes on geopolitics, but some may choose not to vote over these kind of issues. True. That's what the Harris and Democrats broadly may be more worried about, is this idea that it could depress turnout among more progressive voters and in critical areas like Michigan.
Well, as we make reference to the situation in Israel and throughout the Middle East, we're joined here in Washington by a major stakeholder. That would be Nir Barkat, Israel's Minister of the Economy, visiting Washington on this important day for our politics here in the U.S. Minister, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us again on Bloomberg.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
I don't know if you want to dip your toe into these waters tonight, but of course a lot of people around the world are going to be watching this debate to try to get a sense of what choices the United States and the world are facing here when it comes to the next president. Will you take time to watch tonight? Can you give us a sense of what you are looking to hear?
Well, naturally, I think it's healthy for Israelis not to get involved in American politics. We want to stay bipartisan. We want to make our case and remind the American public and the world public who we're up against. Israel's against radical jihadists that want to wipe us off the map. They also want to wipe out all non-Muslims. This is jihad. And what you saw, the atrocities we saw in October 7, from their perspective, they want to rearm, regroup, and do it again and again and again. That's their charter. And this is what we're facing. Not only with Hamas, we're also facing Hezbollah in the north, the same jihadists. They want to wipe us off the map. They're troubling our northern border. Just to give you some perspective, we have 70,000 Israelis out of their homes. It's like 2.5 million people in the United States. That's the equivalent. Double than San Diego if it was attacked from Mexico. More than Manhattan. This is the kind of pain we're suffering in the north, and we have to fix it. Add to that the fact that Iran and Qatar, the head of the snake and the biggest funder of terror, are also part of that alliance. They're funding. Qatar is the biggest funder of terror around the world. Their blood money. Wolf in sheep's clothes. They funded Taliban. They funded ISIS. They fund all terror cells around the world. And Iran, that wants to go after the moderate Arab states as much as they're targeting us. This is the alliance that Israel is against. And thank God, it's a great opportunity to thank the administration, to thank the American people for the huge support we're getting. We must understand that it's not a simple task. We have to eliminate Hamas off the map and not enable them to attack us again.
Well, as you talk about Qatar specifically being a funder of terror, they are also one of the parties at the negotiating table who are helping mediate ceasefire talks between your government and Hamas. Are they not credible in this? Why are they part of those conversations if it sounds like you have zero reason that you see to trust them?
One of the biggest mistakes our own government made, including the U.S. government, is enable Qatar to fund Hamas. A huge mistake we've made, and it's not too late to correct it. We prefer to see the Emirates and the Saudis that seek peace, that are looking for to expand the Abraham Accord. We'd like to see them support moderate Arab Palestinians. And we have to eradicate and take away the capabilities of Hamas, the atrocities that we're still going through. And look at what they've just done. They murdered in cold blood 6 of the hostages in cold blood. They don't care about our lives. They don't care. They think differently. They use every weaponry they have in order to kill Israelis, and they don't care about their own lives. They don't care at all. They hide behind their own civilians. We protect our civilians. They use their civilians as shield because they know our strength, which is perceived as a weakness by them, because we care about human life. And they have no care. They promote death and destruction.
Your ministry, your finance ministry, has cut its projection for growth in 2024, and Bloomberg is reporting that you're lowering your GDP forecast for 25. What is the cost, financially speaking, of this war?
Well, naturally, every round of violence in our region, there's a dip in the war. It's clear. People go to reserves, and we're focusing on winning the war.
Can you quantify that?
Yeah, well, we entered the war at a ratio of 60% debt to GDP, which is one of the best in the world. We're now at about 70% debt to GDP. We'll spread that throughout the years. We understand that we have to focus on winning the war first. I'm here speaking to many investors, and the potential of Israeli technology and high-tech is not decreased, it increased. So right now there's a bit of people are a bit shying away. But as they're shying away right now, I know that the world is interested in great products. And we have great security product, healthcare, agro-tech, food tech, desert tech. We have a lot to offer to the world, and there's no doubt in my mind that you're going to see a nice spike immediately after the war of success.
Well, so what are you hearing from investors about their criteria to come back in, if you will? Just that the war needs to be over, or that they already need to see a recovery in the Israeli economy? The reservists, for example, who had left their jobs being reincorporated back into the workforce. What is it going to take?
It's split to two. People that are not familiar with Israel, that are sort of a bit of shying away because they're not certain where this is going. But a lot of Jews and people familiar with Israel see great opportunity right now because they understand that the strength of Israel's economy influences all Jews around the world. So you see, while some people are shying away, the others are getting more engaged and involved. And from my experience and coming from the tech world, I know that immediately after, you're going to see huge investment flow because we have great products, great entrepreneurs, great solutions to give to the world. And the world responds very favorably to great products, that's why I'm very optimistic as to the future.
Of course, this is an important part of the conversation here on Bloomberg, and it sounds like you're seeing across the valley to a greater opportunity. Before this all started, we were talking about the cusp of an important economic partnership with the Arab world. Will you restart those talks? Will Saudi Arabia be back in this conversation in that world?
I believe so. Look, the Abraham Accords are there. The Emirates, the Jordanians, the Egyptians. Well, it's not perfect. But I see how the Saudis and other moderate Arab states, including potentially Indonesia and others, are waiting to have a window of opportunity to enter and expand the Abraham Accord. We bless it. Well, I think it's great for the stability of our region. The Sunnis, which is the moderate Arab states like the Saudis and the Emiratis are threatened by Iran. Just the other day, about 2 weeks ago, Iran clearly stated that they are going after them. They're the biggest enemy for Iran. Iran wants to take over all the holy sites of the Islam and then go after Israel. And guess what? You're next in line. All the non-Muslims are in the same line for these radical jihadists. And so I think it's in our best interest, it's in their best interest, it's in America's best interest to align with the moderate Arab states. They write big checks, they're interested in collaboration and integrating with the West, and we're the gateway for that.
Well, of course, as we consider the Middle East as a whole and the fact that we're seeing a presidential debate tonight between two candidates who will not, one of them will be president in January. It will not be President Biden, who has said one of the things he wants to accomplish before he leaves office is peace in the Middle East and a ceasefire deal. Does the Israeli government have confidence this is something that could happen within the current administration, or is this going to be something Donald Trump or Kamala Harris have to continue?
We always wish for peace. And if there's a way, we will be there.
Do you see a way right now?
The challenge is, a ceasefire is very simple. The minute Hamas lays down its weaponry, releases the hostages, there's a ceasefire. Immediately. But as long as they keep those hostages, and as long as they again and again say that they want to eradicate Israel, and they want to do it again and again, we got to make sure, like what happened with the Nazis, okay? You didn't leave some of the Nazis to regroup at the tail end of the Second World War, those criminals. And these criminals, these psychopaths, we cannot enable them to continue ruling Gaza and to prepare for the next October 7 attack. So from our perspective, I wish it was, it's a strategic goal for Israel to have peace with its neighbors. We've demonstrated that with Egypt, 40 years peace, with Jordan, 25 years. Now the Abraham Accord, a few years. We want to expand that with people that recognize the state of Israel. And when they don't recognize the state of Israel and they've committed those atrocities, we will not let them live after this round of violence.
We only have about a minute left, Minister. What has been the economic impact, if any, of the recent strikes that we've seen? There was a call for a general strike recently. Can you see that borne out in the numbers?
I'm proud of our democracy. It's a real democracy. Debate, people go out to the street. And by the way, sometimes on both sides of the aisle. And they have the right to go to a strike. Eventually, there's a price for democracy. Israel's willing to pay that price. We're proud of it. And being the only democracy in the Middle East, enabling people to succeed with human rights that no one around us has such human rights. And we're very, very proud of that. It's part of the price, and I'm proud of our democracy.
All right, we have to leave it there, Minister. Thank you so much for joining us here in Washington while on your visit. That is the Israeli Minister of the Economy, Nir Barkat. We appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for being with us. And we still have much more ahead here on Balance of Power as we look ahead, again, to the presidential debate happening tonight. More is next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We are looking at a mixed U.S. stock market right now. The Dow is lower. We got the S&P, NASDAQ. They are both advancing. S&P right now higher by 5, up by about 0.1%. The S&P at 54.76. The Dow well off session lows, still down 170 points now. A decline of 0.4%. The Dow at 40,660. We've got NASDAQ up 58 now, a gain of 0.3%. 10-year 3.64%, with the 2-year 3.60%. Gold up $8 the ounce to $25.14, up by about 0.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 4.5% at $65.67 a barrel. Brent very close to $69 a barrel, just above that level right now, but it is trading below $70 a barrel of Brent today, down by 3.9%. Stocks are wavering after cautious comments from some of Wall Street's biggest banks. Case in point, J.P. Morgan Chase. The stock right now lower by 5.7% as its president said analysts are being too optimistic in projecting next year's expenses and net interest income. Other banks moving lower as well. Goldman Sachs down 4.5%. Citigroup right now down 3.1%. Bank of America also lower by 0.7%. JPM, though, bears repeating. J.P. Morgan Chase down by 5.8%. Southwest Airlines Chairman Gary Kelly is stepping down along with 6 directors. It is a dramatic step after the carrier faced calls for a strategic overhaul from activist investor Elliott Investment Management. Shares of Southwest, they are lower now. We've got Southwest Airlines down by 3.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now, whenever and wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet, with his eye on the markets every day here on the fastest show in politics. We keep our hands in both pots. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington, where we're counting down to the big debate, 9 o'clock tonight. It is our focus today here on Balance of Power as we try to bring you a range of voices to get a sense of what to watch and what to expect. Kaylee, this is going to be arguably the most important day on the campaign trail between now and November for good reason.
Well, absolutely. It may be the only time we see these two share a stage. It comes at a time when poll after poll suggests that this is an incredibly close race. There is no clear leader right now, nationally or in the swing states that will ultimately decide the balance of the Electoral College. And what that means is that they're not only trying to convince their bases of voters tonight that they can trust them, that they should turn out for them, but especially that they're trying to focus on those people who may yet be undecided or are just trying to decide whether or not they're going to bother showing up at all on November 5th.
All the while trying to needle their opponent. As we hear, they are both trying to get under the other's skin tonight. There's been a lot of pre-gaming and trolling going on. So there are quite a few jobs they're both trying to do at once here, a bit of 3D chess.
Yes. Indeed. So as we look at the board, the chessboard that is, we want to bring back now to Balance of Power Professor Jen Jackson, who is joining us from Syracuse University, where she is assistant professor of political science. Always great to have you here, Jen. If we could just actually begin with a conversation we were just having a few moments ago. We spoke with the Israeli minister of the economy, who, no surprise, spoke quite forcefully about what his government is trying to accomplish as it fights its ongoing war against Hamas in Gaza. He didn't really seem to want to weigh in on what he's looking for in the debate tonight from either of these candidates. What are undecided voters, specifically the ones that you spend a lot of time talking to, young black voters or voters of color, more progressives who may feel passionately about this Israel issue? What are they looking to hear?
You know, I think a lot of young people have been waiting to hear the same things probably for the past few years as they have been the past few weeks, which is a really clear stance on what lies ahead for the folks who are most vulnerable in the United States. I'm thinking right now about LGBTQIA plus Americans and those folks who have been working really hard over the past few years to recover from the COVID-19 crisis. So while Gaza and the ongoing conflict that's happening with Israel and in the Gazan, on the Gazan Peninsula, there's also some questions here about what it means for those Americans who have been asking and asking and asking for answers also back home domestically.
You wonder to what extent geopolitics will factor into this debate at all, Jen, and you can speak to that. The moderators have a lot of places they could go here with so many questions about policy proposals, more of them, I think, aimed at Kamala Harris than Donald Trump. And I wonder your thought on that. I think it's been established that the bar is higher for the vice president. She's less known than Donald Trump and has not put forth details on some of her ideas. What do you think?
You know, I think they have different issues that they're facing tonight, right? So what we know is that there's a lot of concern about Project 2025 and the fact that in the first 10 pages, there are overt attacks against marginalized Americans, namely, you know, Black and brown Americans, immigrant folks, and also LGBTQIA and disabled folks. So a lot of folks who are typically associated with the Democratic Party are really paying attention tonight to hear more about how this Project 2025 might actually affect their lives. Where VP Harris has an opportunity is to actually give us some sort of policy that will actually speak against this kind of retraction of protections, this retraction of rights that is very clearly a part of not only Project 2025, but some of Trump's previous administration. His previous Agenda 47 is almost mirrored identically in Project 2025. And this was the agenda that was seeking to make binary gender a kind of federal statute to think about ways to retract support for policies that offer gender-affirming care, and also to sue practitioners and even identify folks like librarians and teachers as sex offenders. So there's an opportunity for VP Harris to set herself apart and explain how she'll create a more progressive vision for folks who are most afraid of what the outcomes might be in this election. But for the Trump camp, they've got to help people understand why we should take them seriously at all. And I would say at this point, maybe we shouldn't.
Well, okay, Professor, as we consider whether or not Kamala Harris will be outlining more progressive ideas, she may be haunted a bit by her primary campaign of 2019, in which a lot of these attacks that she's been fielding from her opponents emanate from. Her stance on fracking, for example, healthcare and other matters. Is it wise for her to try to hold the center tonight, or does she need to be pulled to the left a little bit if she wants to turn out the voters who will actually amount to them that could make her president?
You know, I think that she's been working really hard for the past few weeks to get those moderate voters on her side. And I think she's going to have a balanced kind of approach tonight. There are people who are listening who actually, I think that typically folks see as kind of in the pocket of the Democrats. Those people who are more on the radical left or the more leftist politics, they believe that those folks will automatically show up to vote because they're hoping that those young people, those marginalized folks, those vulnerable populations, working class Americans will want to save us from fascism and hope that this will be a preservation of democracy. But they can't just count on people believing that she'll stand up for them. They can't take those voters for granted. So she will absolutely have to toe the line between some of that more kind of left-leaning policy work and helping us understand what that looks like, but also remembering that moderate voters are still asking questions of both sides.
Mm-hmm. Jen, it's our job to try to pull you into policy here. We're on Bloomberg TV and radio, and you're pretty good at that. But I wonder to what extent this is a personality contest tonight and the battle of the zingers.
You know, that's the thing that I'm actually concerned about. You know, we've seen over the last few weeks that Trump has come out and literally said that his team told him not to attack Kamala in a personal way, and he did it anyway. And so I think that, you know, there will always be kind of folks choosing their approach. And we know that for Donald Trump, that has previously been through the kind of character assassinations and the efforts to denigrate people based on who that he thinks they are. So I think where VP Harris has really stood apart from him is that she's focused on how she's going to show up for everyday Americans. Well, so he may be fighting that fight. He may be jousting in terms of those negative attacks tonight, but I don't think that she's going to lower herself to that level. She hasn't yet, and I don't think she should today.
Jen, how should we be considering the role of the moderators here, knowing there was essentially no fact-checking at all in the CNN debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden back in June? Do you expect to see different behavior from those actually asking the questions tonight? Answering them is one thing, but actually trying to solicit truth or represent truth effectively in a forum like this when millions of Americans will be watching is a major question here.
I think that's something that a lot of us are concerned about, those of us who do social scientific work and are hoping that the facts will prevail. But what we've also seen is that, specifically on the Trump side, there's been efforts to pull back on fact-checking. And we saw this at the NABJ conference earlier this season. So I think that the concern has been that even if there are some kind of guardrails in place to ensure that facts are centered, there may be also some tactics to try and pull back on that. So I think that the moderators have a tough road ahead of them, because we know that this is a tactic that the Trump administration, even when he was in office, used to manipulate the kind of narratives that came out from the policies that he enacted. So I'm not confident that it'll be an easy conversation. I actually think it'll be quite hard to keep him on topic, to keep him on task, and to get him to actually answer the hard questions. And that's where, Americans have continued to be disappointed by these conversations, because they're not getting the answers that they're looking for.
Hey, Jen, it's great to have you back. I know you'll be watching like we are tonight. Jen Jackson, assistant professor, political science, Syracuse University, author of Black Women Taught Us, an Intimate History of Black Feminism. Always a smart conversation, Jen, and we appreciate that. As we try to get an eye as well, Kaylee, or get a handle on the way Wall Street is looking at this, we have so many different audiences to consider tonight. If the economy is going to loom large, if this is issue number one, then yes, Wall Street cares. A lot of questions about the potential for taxing unrealized capital gains, what the impact of tariffs will be, both campaigns.
Yeah, I think business has a lot of questions in particular, as Harris, of course, has floated a 28% corporate tax rate, a higher capital gains tax, to your point. Donald Trump has suggested she is advocating for a tax on unrealized capital gains. Right. She hasn't actually yet. That's not part of the platform.
That's why I'd love to hear about
that is
this.
on the website.
Joe
but
Biden had suggested it.
Yes.
She was part of that administration, but she may not be pursuing it.
She still might have to answer for it tonight, though.
Abigail Doolittle is watching through the prism of Wall Street for us. Back with us today, of course, Bloomberg Markets correspondent Abigail. To what extent is Wall Street actually zeroing in on this debate tonight to find answers?
I think probably not so much, Joe and Kelly. I think that Wall Street is a little bit jittery right now for reasons outside of the debate. Tomorrow, there could certainly be a market reaction, but on the day, right now, we have the S&P 500 up about 0.1%, but that's after having been as high as almost 0.5% and having been down about 0.5%. So some real intraday volatility there. That said, a great day for the intersection between business and politics. And the reason I say that around this debate, one of these candidates, or both, they really have to start distinguishing themselves, because it's really interesting. For the last couple of months, the three of us, we've been watching the betting odds on this race, and at one point, former President Donald Trump was ahead of Kamala Harris by 20%. Then Kamala Harris, not so long ago, into the DNC, ahead by nearly 15%. Now it's literally neck and neck. It's 52% to 52%. So they really have to say something substantive, form over the performance, substance, policy. That's what I think Wall Street and, frankly, everybody, individuals, want to know too.
Abigail, we also can't let you go without taking note of what's happening with oil prices today. WTI with a 65 handle, down 4.4% on the day. You're seeing a drop in Brent as well. We know what that means. Likely prices at the pump are going to go lower. They're already, of course, much lower than they were at this time last year. That has political implications as well. What exactly is happening in oil right now?
Kaylee, great question. It's interesting that you're saying this, because, of course, tomorrow is CPI, and for the first time that I can remember, the CPI ex food and energy is actually much higher than with food and energy, whereas I think that for many of us in our real lives, food and energy feels like it is that big force. But yes, oil is absolutely dropping like a crater right down to the bottom of a range. WTI, as you mentioned, at $65 per barrel. This could be very good for Americans, because it effectively is taking a tax off of incomes in some way. And depending on who tries to take credit for this, of course, VP Harris would probably have a better chance of doing it, although Donald Trump is a master marketer, and it wouldn't be surprising to see him somehow take credit for it, and people's perception that he's going to be better for pipelines or something along those lines. But this is certainly a positive for both candidates in a way for the economy. What I would say, though, is it is a risk asset and typically will trade with stocks and could be a negative tell of some sort on some sort of a soft recession. Some of our analysts here at Bloomberg Intelligence, as early as last year when the Bloomberg Commodity Index was down more than 10% and the S&P 500, the other indexes higher, we're saying that that weakness, a sign of a possible recession this year. And lo and behold, we now have WTI sharply lower.
All right, Bloomberg Markets correspondent Abigail Doolittle joining us from New York. Thank you so much. It'll be interesting to see if gas prices are brought up on that debate stage tonight. We'll, of course, have full coverage of the debate, special coverage, in fact, beginning at 8 p.m. And before that, we'll see you at 5 p.m. for Balance of Power right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. Live on Bloomberg TV, radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. It is Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday, September 10th, 2024. I'm Tim Stenevec, and that is Katie Greifeld. She's in for Carol Masser today. Katie coming to us courtesy of Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg News. Katie, how are you?
I'm okay.
Okay.
You know, I'm doing a little bit better than the markets.
Yeah.
Sort of wavering back and forth. Was it yesterday that I said that we're so back?
Yeah, it was yesterday.
I think that
you take
today,
that back?
Maybe we're back. It's
Okay.
unclear because, you know, sort of wiggling back and forth when it comes to that S&P 500.
Okay, well, some of Wall Street's biggest banks giving a cautious outlook, and that's sending some shivers around the S&P 500. Oil falling below $70 on oversupply fears. This follows a rally to start the week when Katie said that we are back. We're going to have much more on the markets in just a minute. Still ahead, though, it is debate night in America. We're going to go to Philadelphia for a preview of what we may hear from Harris and Trump.
And more on those banks taking a dive today with JP Morgan, done the most in more than 4 years. We're going to get what you need to know from our Bloomberg intelligence analyst.
And we're all in on tech today. Mark Gurman joins us with analysis on everything that Apple announced yesterday, and Ed Ludlow on the European Union's crackdown on big tech. All that and more over the next hour on Bloomberg Business Week. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And lots going on today. Right to the numbers here because we're looking at a mixed market right now. Are we back? We got the S&P up 8, 54.79, up by about 0.1%. The Dow, though, does remain in the red, down 181 right now, decline of 1.4%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 84, up by about 0.5%. 10-year 3.64% with a 2-year 3.60%. Spot gold up $6.50 the ounce to $25.12, up by about 0.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil right now 65.68, down 4.4%. We had Brent taking out 70, 69.06 right now. Barrel of Brent down by 3.9%. Stocks have been wavering after cautious outlooks from some of Wall Street's biggest banks. Case in point, J.P. Morgan Chase. That stock now down by 5.9%. Among other banks, we have got Goldman Sachs down 4.7%. Citigroup shares down 3%. Bank of America down now by just about 0.9%. Oracle, though, after earnings, keeps on going up another 10.8% today, climbing to a record. The software giant last night reported profit and bookings that topped estimates. Again, recapping, stocks are trading mixed, S&P up by 0.2%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Really do appreciate it. Well, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are facing off tonight in Philadelphia for their first and potentially only debate before the November election. It's a high-stakes opportunity with the potential to further upend an already tumultuous race. The debate set in the key battleground state of Pennsylvania, a crucial test for the VP and the former president. David Gura is standing by. He's Bloomberg News correspondent and host of the Big Take podcast. He joins us from Philadelphia. David, a lot of people used to say debates didn't matter, but then came that fateful debate at the end of June, which of course led to President Biden dropping out. What are the stakes of this debate?
You've laid out the significance so well, Tim, and you're wise to bring up that past debate. I mean, it was so seismic, had such a seismic effect on this campaign. A lot of people not downplaying the potential significance of this one, and as you say, could be the only one before the election. So let me just go through how each campaign is looking at this debate. Donald Trump has had difficulty sort of landing blows or trying to find a way to make his case known against Vice President Harris since she became the nominee just a few weeks ago. What he's going to try to do over the course of this debate, as we understand it, is kind of tether her to President Joe Biden to make the case that if she were elected, that would just be kind of a continuation of what we've had over the last 4 years. Now, for Vice President Harris, arguably this is more important a moment for her because if she looks at the most recent polling from the New York Times and Siena College, there are more than a quarter of respondents who say they don't know who she is or what she stands for or what direction she would take the country in. So again, going back to the fact that this could be the only debate before Election Day, this is a huge moment for her to introduce herself, reintroduce herself, make people aware of what she stands for again and sort of what she's thinking of in terms of how her platform would translate to governance if she's elected in November, guys.
Yeah, I was speaking to Tobin Marcus from Wolf Research earlier today on open interest. Tim, it's on Bloomberg Television.
9 to 11.
a.m. Eastern,
Okay.
Exactly right. And he said one of the goals for Kamala Harris tonight is basically to look presidential. This will be the first time she's standing next to Donald Trump. And David, I actually want to talk to you about the rules. It's exactly the question I asked you a few hours ago. Talk to us about the rules of engagement because the mics are going to be muted again. And it's interesting. This is something that the Trump team actually pushed for.
Yes, the Trump team wanted the mics to be muted so that there wouldn't be any moments for kind of spontaneous interaction between these two candidates that would be picked up. That, you know, if Donald Trump were razzed by the vice president, for instance, he would respond in kind. So the Trump campaign did win that argument, and the mics, just like in Atlanta, will be muted when the other candidate is speaking. To your point about Vice President Harris looking presidential, it will be interesting to see her on the stage debating in this way. I mean, she has done a major debate before, at least one against Mike Pence, and she, of course, is a seasoned and formerly professional prosecutor, so she has kind of a good sense of herself and how to comport herself on a stage like this one, but it's been some time since that debate took place, so it'll be interesting to see both how she chooses to behave on stage, if she is prosecutorial. How she interacts with Donald Trump is even more interesting, I think, to a lot of viewers, just because, as we've talked about a lot over the course of the day, these are two people who haven't met before, haven't spoken before, so that just immediate moment when the debate begins will be so interesting just to watch the two of them and see how they interact with one another once they're out there going to their respective podiums here in Philadelphia.
I'm really interested in that too, David. I recall, Donald Trump does not like Joe Biden, and we know the way he's talked about Kamala Harris. Do these two even shake hands tonight? I remember Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump shook hands back in 2016, and that's a wild image to see today.
It's a great question, and I'm eager to see what happens there. And I think it's safe to say that the Harris campaign has studied very carefully the footage of those debates between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And something that I've thought a lot about is how much during the course of those debates Hillary Clinton talked about Donald Trump's attitude toward women, alleged misogyny on the stage itself. We have seen candidate Harris kind of stray away from that. If you think back on the interview that Dana Bash did with her and her running mate, Tim Walz, just a couple of weeks ago, she didn't really engage when she was asked about her being a woman and a woman of color. She's kind of trying to actively stray away from that part of her identity. So we'll see how that comes across tonight, if it does as well. But I think you raise a really interesting point, Tim, which is just sort of, again, how they're going to interact with one another. Yes, it's how they interact within the ground rules that have been set here by the two campaigns and by ABC News, how many minutes they have to respond, who responds first, what the rebuttal's like, et cetera. But it's more than that. It's just sort of how, as two individuals, they kind of complement each other on stage and how they interact.
And David, really quickly, also on the rules, they have to stay behind their podiums. There were, of course, those images that we showed on screen of Donald Trump sort of following Hillary around in 2016 on the stage. Not going to happen tonight, but just quickly, give us the landscape of the polling heading into it. So, and we know that it's very, very close when you take a look at the national polls. How much could this debate matter?
It's incredibly close, and within the margin of error on the most recent poll that we got from the New York Times and Siena College, but other ones as well, at the national level, but at the swing state level as well. So this could be could be a huge differentiator as we look ahead here. I mean, the great fear from Kamala Harris's campaign is that she's stalled out in terms of support. She had a sizable rise, surge from being named through the convention. Now we've seen the race narrow. That's to be expected. What they fear most is that they don't have something that's kind of catalytic that would keep her rising through the polls. But I will say, Katie, this is going to be an incredibly close race. Both campaigns recognize that. So they're looking for any differentiators they can find. This certainly is one tonight.
David Gura, Bloomberg News correspondent, host of the Big Take podcast, joining us from Philadelphia. We're going to check in with David a little later on our program, Bloomberg Business Week, in the 3 o'clock hour. Reminder, Bloomberg Television and Radio will have special coverage of ABC's presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, starting at 8 p.m. Wall Street time. Well, from Philadelphia to Los Angeles, which is where we find Bloomberg News chief technology correspondent Mark Gurman, because we've got to talk Apple. Shares of the company finished ever so slightly higher yesterday after Apple introduced the latest version of its iPhone 16. Shares ever so slightly higher today. The company betting it can entice customers with modest hardware upgrades and AI tech that's still on the horizon. Mark Gurman, I've got an iPhone 13. Katie has got, I don't know what it is. It's this
like
small,
a single digit
little iPhone that looks many years old. Should we be lining up to buy this new thing?
Well, I think it's time for both of you to upgrade, right? I mean, come on, we talk about this stuff on a daily basis. You should be on something a little bit newer. So I think that's actually, you hit the nail on the head there, because I don't think that this is an upgrade designed to gather people from a 15 Pro Max. I think this is an update designed to get people on much older hardware or people in other smartphone ecosystems like Android, right? Because the year-over-year hardware improvements are essentially negligible. It's one of the smallest, I think, annual hardware improvements that I've seen from Apple in a long time. Maybe a little bit more significant than going from the 12 to the 13, but yeah, this is pretty bleak. And then the artificial intelligence stuff is really cool, but that's not coming for quite a while, and it's going to be pretty much a phased rollout. So I think they're going for people that are coming in from older phones.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because I feel like at this point,
That's like you, Katie, and me too,
yeah,
I guess.
but because when you think about switching from Android to Apple, I feel like Mark, there's like this cult of personality that has developed among each phones. I mean, if you have an Android in the year of our Lord 2024, are you going to switch to an iPhone? I mean, that seems like that would sort of go against what you believe in at this point.
Well, if your friends and family force you to because they're tired of you not being able to be in the group chat because you're a green bubble versus their blue bubbles, right? A lot of times it's friends and family pushing people to make that switch. So, you want your photos to be in sync with everyone else. You want your subscriptions to be in sync with everyone else. So I think that's a component there. I mean, there's some people who are never going to switch from Android, and there's a lot of people who are never going to switch from Apple to Android. But I think that they're constantly pushing the needle in terms of how they can bring more people from the Android ecosystem. They've made iOS far more customizable to be more like Android. You can now tint your icons to different colors. You can put your icons anywhere. You don't have to fit within that home screen grid. There's a lot more customizability for the lock screen and control center. So I certainly think that there is a movement going on from Apple to try to make the iPhone more appealing to people coming from the Android world.
Network effects, Tim.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah, I think there are case studies for business school written about Apple's
And you've
network
been to
effects.
business school.
Well, Mark, I do wonder. I mean, you bring up, Mark, the idea of people going out and buying iPhones or getting their family to do it. Didn't Tim Cook a few years ago kind of rib somebody and told him to go buy an iPhone for his mom or his grandma or something?
Well, if you think about it from a financial standpoint and from a fiduciary duty standpoint, he probably didn't need to say that, but his number one priority is to make as much of a return as he can for shareholders, and what drives that return is revenue. And so him telling that person in that audience, I was actually there when he said, I was a little shocked that he said that, that he should buy an iPhone from his mom, well, that was maybe a rude or snarky or funny comment. The reality is that's what he has to say. But that was in response to a question about RCS specifically. Now, I guess the good news for that person in the crowd, if they have not bought their mom an iPhone to this point, is that RCS is coming to the iPhone, and it's coming as part of iOS 18. It's already embedded in there, right? I've been using RCS for a couple months now.
Explain what that is.
Well, RCS, it's Rich Communication Services. It's basically a next generation version of SMS. It's what Android is using. It takes a lot of the features like Wi-Fi texting, read receipts, delivered notifications, high resolution image transfers for both group chats and one-to-one chats, brings them to the Android world. And now, if you're on an iPhone, you'll be able to use RCS to communicate with people on the Android ecosystem. So you'll start green bubble texting with people who don't have an iPhone when you get this iOS 18 update, and you'll start getting read receipts. You'll see images are coming in a little bit more clearly. So that is a nice upgrade to make things more interoperable. At the time, obviously, this is not something Apple wanted to do, but they sort of threw this out as a peace offering, right, or as an olive branch to the different regulatory institutions globally, saying we're going to do this, maybe go a little bit easier on us.
Hey, Mark, we have a couple more minutes left with you. I want to talk a little more about what we learned from the company with regards to AI yesterday. You said it's sort of this incremental rollout. What's the promise that Apple has to its customers when it comes to AI?
Well, the promise they have to their customers is that it's going to launch in October, a month after it launches, after the new iPhones go on sale. And they've basically promised a roadmap of features that are going to launch over the next several months. But, their big differentiator there is their privacy standpoint, right? They've been talking about their private cloud compute, which basically uses Apple chips in the cloud to store and process the information using artificial intelligence. And that's a little bit different than the competition because they're promising to keep your data absolutely secure. There have been other companies that use AI to create data and profiles on users, whereas Apple Apple is not doing that. So that is a bit of a differentiator there. At the same time, the functionality is not as broad and as powerful, I would argue, as AI on the Google Pixel and the Samsung and some of the other phones. At the outset, you're talking about summarizing notifications of incoming messages, incoming emails, Slacks, etc. You're talking about prioritizing notifications. Once we get into December, we're starting to get into the image generation class of products, right? Talking about Genmoji, which you can use text to create your own emoji. There's an example of you can type in "when pigs fly" and it'll create a flying pig to send back to your friend in a text message, right? And so that's going to be cool and fun and all, but we'll see if this is stuff that catches on. Me personally, I don't think 99% of consumers care about AI. They've heard of it. Maybe they don't know what it is, but I don't think they care enough to influence purchasing decisions in large numbers.
All right, Mark, you got to go. We could spend all day talking to you about Apple. We always appreciate you taking the time, especially fresh off of covering that event yesterday. Mark Gurman, Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent, joining us from Los Angeles. Shares of Apple right now higher by just about 0.1%. Katie, they were lower yesterday for much of the day. Then they rose toward the end of the session. I don't know. A lot of the stuff investors kind of knew was coming.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you can't really read into too much what happens the day or the day after one of these events.
What I thought was interesting is that beyond the iPhone, I mean, we also got comments about AirPods, for example.
Yeah, the health stuff is really cool, right?
Yeah, hearing aid functionality. And if you take a look earlier today, and even now still, you have a bunch of European hearing aid stocks that were falling on the day, basically because now you have Apple entering the game, and it makes sense. You think about the network effects that we were talking about. If you already have AirPods and you use hearing aids, maybe you just stick with your AirPods.
Maybe. They did have that demo video of that woman around her family. I think it was like a birthday or something, using the AirPods as hearing aids. And the AirPods, so they give this signal that you're listening to something and not necessarily engage with the people around you.
True.
Whereas hearing aids are totally hidden.
Yeah.
And go unnoticed, I think, to a lot of people. So it sends a different signal about how engaged you are with a group, in my view. That was the first thing I thought of.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But how often do you have a conversation where someone has at least one AirPod in? It happens to me all the time, even with my own family.
I would never do that to you.
Really? I could absolutely see that happening. I think it's becoming normalized. People just wearing AirPods.
I think it's normalized. Hopefully, they're not listening to anything when they're talking.
Well, that's, sometimes when my mom is doing that to me, I ask, "Are you listening?" And she always is. It's just in case, she has the AirPods.
Just in case of what?
I might get a call.
Okay.
Then I might start ignoring you.
Hey, let's talk about your phone a little bit.
Oh, God.
You have this small iPhone that you've had for years. Are you going to upgrade?
No.
Yeah. You're not ready?
It works.
You're a unique case, too, I think we should share, because can I tell everybody how you communicate?
Oh, God.
So Katie and her husband don't do traditional text messages.
No.
You guys are like the Facebook couple.
We use Facebook
You
Messenger.
use Facebook Messenger, so it doesn't matter if he has an Android and you have an iPhone.
Yeah.
Because you're using this over-the-top messaging service.
We might as well be
doesn't really matter.
communicating with like tin cans at that point. The fact that we still use Facebook Messenger, but we've been on it since 2011, and the kind of has the incumbency advantage. It's hard to, break a habit there.
Not even WhatsApp. Mark Zuckerberg knows all.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, markets. Volume is higher, but stocks, not really sure what to do. Though the big tech stocks, the NASDAQ 100, that is your outperformer on the day.
Yeah, the NASDAQ Composite up by 0.6%. Taking a quick look at the NASDAQ 100, higher right now by 0.7%. Coming up next, we're continuing talking tech. We're going to head out to San Francisco and get the latest on that double boost to the European Union's crackdown on big tech from Ed Ludlow. That's next on Business Week.
2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ trading mixed right now. The Dow now down by 155 points, a decline of just about 0.4%. S&P is advancing 12, up 0.2%. NASDAQ up 109, higher by 0.7%. Bottom line here, choppy markets, stocks wavering after cautious outlooks from some of Wall Street's biggest banks. Brent oil falling below $70 on oversupply fears. The 10-year at 3.64%, with the 2-year right now 3.600%. We've got spot gold up $7 the ounce to $25.14, up 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 3.5%, 65.62 a barrel. As I mentioned, Brent trading at 69 even right now, down by 4%. Volkswagen is ending job protections for auto workers in Germany as part of its cost-cutting push, setting up a showdown with unions as the country's most important industry fights for its future. ADRs of Volkswagen here in the U.S., they're down 3.2%. BMW, meanwhile, is lowering expectations for the year after a faulty braking system from supplier Continental prompted a recall and a halt to deliveries of some 1.5 million vehicles. BMW ADRs, they're dropping now by 10.8%. Again, recapping, stocks are mixed. Dow Industrials down 0.5%, S&P up by 0.2%, and the 10-year 3.64%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Do appreciate it. Well, Apple lost its court fight over a $14.4 billion Irish tax bill. Google lost its challenge over a $2.6 billion fine for abusing its market power. It's a double boost to the EU's crackdown on big tech. The EU's Court of Justice in Luxembourg backed a landmark 2016 decision that Ireland broke state aid law by giving Apple an unfair advantage. The same court ruling that Google illegally leveraged its search engine dominance to give a higher ranking to its own product listings. Ed Ludlow's co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV. He's got an EU law degree, so he's the perfect guy.
He's a European lawyer.
He's the perfect guy to talk to about this. He joins us from our San Francisco bureau. Okay, Ed, $14.4 billion. It's more money than $2.6 billion. But if we read between the lines here, which of these is a bigger impact for the respective company?
You know, joining you guys to talk about how shiny the new iPhone is a lot easier than this, but let's give it a go.
We'll get there, don't worry.
Look, in 2016, a European court ruled that basically Ireland, as a country, but a member state of the European Union, had given Apple preferential tax incentives that were illegal under EU law. And Margrethe Vestager, the competition chief, in sort of landing this decision today, has come out on the right side of an argument she's made for a long time, which is that any member state of the EU cannot have an ad hoc beneficial or preferential tax arrangement with a country. What we're talking about is like where a country says to a tech company, come build with us, invest here, build offices, bring people, and in return you get these things, but the things you get are different to what everyone else gets. And so the money is eye-watering, but just really simply, it's been sat in an escrow account, gathering interest since that initial 2016 decision. All that happened was Apple had a right of appeal under EU law, which ultimately today they have lost.
Wow. So, yeah. I mean, this is interesting, of course, this tax case. There's also a lot of U.S. antitrust news that's going on, especially when it comes to Alphabet, the Google ad empire, et cetera. But with all of these things, I always wonder, how much does it actually matter for the company? I know that, Tim, you were getting at that a little bit, but we talk about these fines for these companies that have more money than a lot of countries proper, and then these antitrust trials, which just take years and years to play out. I mean, do investors really care about this?
I've always found it difficult to track the performance of the stock of a mega cap tech company against the headline about market competition or antitrust. You know, it's always been difficult to tell how sanguine or concerned investors are that a real antitrust action will result in a material impact to that business. Just today, D.A. Davidson, I think, put out, or initiated coverage, actually, on Alphabet, the parent of Google, with a neutral recommendation. And a big part of that was, we feel that antitrust is a headwind to the core search business. So you've always got to take it into account. And I think you guys have had great conversations with Jen Rhee of Bloomberg Intelligence, that in each jurisdiction, what we're increasingly seeing is not just the action of a fine. So in this case, in Google today, they had to pay a fine, which to them is small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. But it's whether or not a regulator requires them to make a fundamental change to their business practice, and therefore whether it will change the fate of whatever that business is.
That's why it seems to me, Ed, if we read between the lines, the case about Google, which has a smaller fine than how much Apple has to pay, is a bigger deal because, yeah, okay, it means Apple's got to pay more taxes. But for Google, this could be like a fundamental threat to the way it does business, at least with this product, right?
Well, I'd make one distinction, which is that mechanically Apple is paying back taxes, or it's paying taxes that it didn't pay in the first place, whereas this is an actual fine. And one interesting distinction, I guess, under EU law is that when an action is brought by the Commission and a fine is issued and then paid, often it goes into a pot of money that's then redistributed across the European Union member states based on complex formulas. So, they're both slaps on the wrist, but again, the biggest question that the street and markets are going to have for Google is EU a regulator on behalf of 440 million people, so an important market for Google, going to require them to change the practices that they currently use? And I don't know that we quite have the answer on many facets of Google's business, which you guys will know will also now include AI, because regulators are looking closely at the investments made by a number of tech companies in other AI companies.
I would imagine that they are. Well, let's tie this back to Apple, and let's tie this back to yesterday so we can pivot to talking about how shiny the iPhones are, because, of course, Apple knew that this was happening. They also knew that there was a presidential debate happening tonight. And that's part of the reason why, of course, we had the event, the big iPhone splash, happen yesterday, Ed.
It's likely. I mean, Bloomberg's reporting was originally that Glow time, the Apple event would be today, the 10th. And when I got the invite from Apple to my inbox, it was the 9th. And, I think sources had told us that was the consideration, right? That you have the presidential debate. And now we know that the EU tribunal was issuing this decision today, and that's now been and gone. I would just add, finally, it's kind of unusual for Apple to do an event on a Monday. But they did, and I don't know what you guys would say. Katie has got, a 6 or 7 generations old phone. She is the case study here of what happens next. Does Katie Greifeld now go up and upgrade her iPhone? That question's being asked world over.
It seems like Katie's not interested in the AI stuff. You just want to know what's best for posting to Twitter.
Yeah, pretty much. I want to be able to tweet. If I could actually think and it tweeted for me, that would be great.
You just need a posting phone.
Yeah, exactly. I will say I'm not going to buy an Android, though. I will eventually get a new iPhone. So that network effect that we were talking about with Mark Gurman, it's real.
Yeah, no question it's real. I think also one thing that I want to go back to, Ed, that you saw close up and firsthand yesterday is Apple's dive into health. And the company for years has been making its pitch to consumers that it's safe with your data, that your data remains private on the iPhone. And it, for years, has been going further and further into health. Talk to us a little bit about what Apple could do to disrupt the healthcare space. I mean, this has been more than a decade-long promise.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 technology updates are sleep apnea through the Apple Watch, which starts with Series 10 but is not exclusive to it, and hearing aid technology through AirPods. Both of them are pending FDA approval, but I mean, Apple in a presentation publicly said that FDA approval is close, and you would wager that they wouldn't say that were they not confident. And it's interesting because, sleep apnea, this is something that, of course, Bloomberg's Mark Gurman had reported, but it's kind of logical with the watch. The more interesting one is probably the hearing aid technology. Yeah. I don't know if you guys kind of track the markets, but some hearing aid stocks fell because they take the competition from Apple seriously. Though the mechanism, the modus operandi through AirPods is very different to a discrete hearing aid. And the story that Apple's trying to tell is holistic, like you point out, Tim. We're super good with privacy and data, but we're also about, you're going to use this anyway, so use it for something that's beneficial to you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Of course, we were talking about that. and talking about the notion of people just keeping it in and talking to you. So we'll see. To your point, Ed, I mean, it's a good one that other companies, investors in other companies are taking the threat seriously when it comes to sort of the ambitions there when it comes to hearing aids. Talk to us about the watches, too. I mean, I care about the watches, not because I'm ever going to switch from a Garmin, but we did get some details on what the next iteration of watches there, what the next evolution in the watch story might look like.
Yeah, it's always interesting, like 24 hours after the fact, of what people are talking about. And I see on social media, even from Mark Gurman, a sort of rethink on the watches. They're a really important part of Apple's strategy, right? Because you're not necessarily going to spend $1,000 on a phone. You might find, $400 more palatable on a smartwatch that has fitness, sport, water sport, and health data for you. But it also goes to the other thing that we were kind of joking about yesterday, but it's seriously important in markets like China, that the Apple Watch hasn't had a refresh since 2022, really. And it's aspirational to have an Apple product. And in the case of the watch, it's like a piece of jewelry. They really emphasize the materials. You can get yourself an Hermes wrist strap. But that is actually, of substance to a lot of buyers in a lot of different markets.
And it's core to the DNA of the watch. Remember that first generation Apple Watch Ed? It was about a decade ago. There was like that $14,000 gold version.
Right.
It's like essentially...
You're talking from experience? Because
No.
That's not something that adorned my wrist.
Yeah,
One thing I would say, though...
It didn't adorn my wrist either, but my first thought when that came out was like, this thing's going to be obsolete in a year. I can't believe anyone would buy such a thing.
One thing I'm going to look into, though, that I find really interesting is when the smartphone comes out, everyone goes, oh, well, I'm on T-Mobile or I'm on Verizon, and they'll give me a deal and I'll upgrade or I won't. But remember, in the United States in particular, there are lots of health insurers that will subsidize you buying a piece of health or fitness equipment.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to see how that works this time around. People are basically post-pandemic so concerned with data about their well-being. And you do wonder if that's going to be a big driver, an upgrade cycle on the wearable side.
Hey, Ed, before we let you go, just in the last 40 seconds we have with you, now that we are 24 hours out from that event, what are the analysts saying? What are their notes saying in general?
Everyone is so bullish. I
Really?
mean, you guys probably get Dan Ives' emails in your inbox from Wedbush. The super cycle's coming if you believe the sell side. And I think part of that is irrespective of whether Apple Intelligence is here now, it will come eventually. So buy yourself a new handset in the anticipation it will come.
Ed Ludlow, co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV, also has a degree in European Union law, so the perfect guy to talk to for everything tech and, of course, antitrust and regulatory from the EU as well. He joins us from our San Francisco bureau. Taking a look at the markets, we got about 85 minutes until they close here in the U.S. The S&P 500 is up by 0.3%. The NASDAQ Composite up by 0.7%. Katie, what's got your attention?
Yeah, big tech making a move for it. It's interesting to see that strength there. Of course, we know that there's a lot of losses among the financials today. Obviously, you're not seeing that in the big tech benchmark. Also, energy, too, which is underrepresented, obviously, in the NASDAQ 100. So that's your leader.
Perfect segue. We're talking financials right after this. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average in the red, the S&P, NASDAQ. They're both advancing right now. 18-point gain on the S&P 500 index. We now stand at 54.89, up by about 0.3%. The Dow lower by 126 points, down 0.3%. NASDAQ now surging 124 points, back above 17,000 for the NASDAQ Composite Index. A gain right now of 0.7%, but bears repeating. We've got NASDAQ right now at 17,010. Stocks wavered after cautious outlooks from some of Wall Street's biggest banks, and Brent oil fell below $70 on oversupply fears. 10-year yield 3.64%, with the 2-year 3.59%. Spot gold up $9 the ounce, up just about 0.4%, while West Texas Intermediate crude 69.38 right now on Brent. Barrel of Brent, the global benchmark, below $70 a barrel. J.P. Morgan Chase shares down 5%, falling the most in more than 4 years, leading bank stocks lower after President Daniel Pinto said analysts are being too optimistic in projecting next year's expenses and net interest income. Again, we've got J.P. Morgan Chase down 5%, rival Citigroup down 2.6%, Goldman down 4.4%, Bank of America down by 0.2%. Oracle, after last night's earnings report, up now by 11%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hi, thanks, Charlie. Do appreciate that. Well, as you just heard from Charlie Pellet, banks taking a dive. J.P. Morgan Chase shares falling the most in more than 4 years. This after President Daniel Pinto said that analysts were being too optimistic in projecting next year's expenses and net interest income. Taking a look at the KBW Bank Index, down right now as we speak by more than 2%, leading bank stocks lower. Pinto's remarks added to a more pessimistic outlook for the biggest U.S. banks after David Solomon, Goldman Sachs CEO, said yesterday that trading revenue at his firm is on track to drop in the third quarter.
First, with respect to trading, I would say that with FICC equities, we had an extremely strong third quarter in 2023. And given this quarter, given what I'd say is a more challenging macro environment, particularly, in the month of August, that business is trending down close to 10%, largely due to FICC.
David Solomon of Goldman Sachs speaking yesterday. Goldman Sachs shares down 4.5%. We got with us Allison Williams, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Global Banks Analyst. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. Allison, net interest income, it's the difference between what banks earn on their assets and what they pay on debts, surged to a record at the 4 largest lenders last year. Hello, higher interest rates. We knew rates were going to come down.
Right.
So what's the surprise here?
I think what investors may be processing is, loan growth. We need loan growth to get net interest income. So it is about rates. It's about the curve, right? So curve are sort of the pricing mechanism. But you need to have really loan growth to improve, to drive that net interest income, keeping in mind that the loans versus securities, obviously loans are going to be more profitable, and credit costs. So it's really that interplay. I think, Goldilocks is a great scenario. I think that's what investors had been excited about in recent times, right? You were going to get the rates come down, so investors were sort of less worried about competition for deposits and thinking that loan growth would rebound as rates came down. But if the economy weakens such that that growth isn't there, that sort of is a crack in the story.
And of course, it's really interesting to hear this from Daniel Pinto over at JP Morgan. We heard from David Solomon yesterday saying that trading revenue is on track to drop 10% in the third quarter, et cetera, of course. So it just seems interesting that we're getting at least 2 of the big banks downgrading expectations. Of course, it's exhausting to think about the next earnings seasons to come. But are they basically setting expectations to then exceed them? Like, how does this play out when we hear from them again?
So you bring up two good points, right? So there's the short term, which is this quarter and trading, and then there's sort of the longer term outlook. Well, not long term, but I would call it intermediate term. So next year, 2025. And so the trading really did not concern me very much. And the reason why is because, first of all, in the third quarter, it's all about September. September really drives the bulk of the revenue. And July was a really strong month. August was not so great, but it generally tends to be weaker. And also keep in mind, as Citigroup pointed out, their rates and currencies business had the best quarter in 10 years, a year ago. So, and the declines are really not that off the mark. And so I think that could be, I don't want to say managing expectations, right? But you could say things are trending X. And then, we see that September, there's a lot of volatility. Perhaps there's a lot of good volume. So I really wouldn't be concerned about one quarter in trading or fees. But the net interest income is more concerning, especially coming from JP Morgan, and especially looking into 2025, and especially since the economic concerns are really sort of, I think, taking over an investor's mindset.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. Can we read into this, or can investors read into this in any way about signals, how the banks are seeing what's coming next when it comes to the U.S. economy? After all, these banks have a great view on the consumer.
Correct, and I think that is a concern. So you saw Ally Financial as another name that's guided lower at the conference. And again, it's sort of that twin hit from both net interest income and credit costs. And so if net interest income isn't going to be as good because loan growth is slowing and the economy is weakening, and so they have to raise their provisions, it is sort of that double whammy. And I think that the banks have been very conservative on credit costs. But they've also been growing card loans pretty significantly. We have seen weaker credit, but there's a seasonal trend to that. It does seem like banks are still expecting things to look better in the second half with that seasonal trend. But then if the economy weakens, is that sort of all bets are off and we get those rising credit costs. Keep in mind the accounting change, which makes things a little bit different this cycle, in that banks have to provision for the life of the loan. So there's a lot more volatility. We saw provisions come up. We've seen provisions come down. If the economic scenario weakens, where banks are placing even just a higher probability on recession, those provisions are going to go up.
So a lot of news for the big banks today. Let's turn to the other big story of today, and that is that the Fed, Bloomberg News reporting, is likely going to cut the capital hike by half, of course, going from 19% to 9% hike to what they need in terms of their capital. I mean, do you think that that's adding on the margin to what we're seeing today? 9% isn't 19%, but it's still a pretty big boost.
I think it could be a little bit of, buy the rumor, sell the news. I would say that this has widely been expected. And in fact, JP Morgan at their investor day had sort of given an illustrative scenario saying, we think it's very reasonable that the requirements could be cut in half. And they were cut in half. So I would say it's right in line with expectations. And so most of the banks had already expected this. I think everyone expected it after some comments Powell had made earlier this year. And so there really is no change. There's no catalyst to the upside because banks had already sort of adjusted their capital plans to account for the fact that these changes are coming. I did think there were some interesting things on the GSIBs side of things, some comments that were made in terms of, making that sort of part of the category, like not making it a cliff, so it could increase by 10 basis points, not 50 basis points, and some things like that. But the other thing is that, what also regulators at Barr said today is the fact that, while they're going to hold off on making certain changes related to certain types of transactions, that, they're going to work with global regulators and figure out what the right numbers are. So there still could be changes on the horizon. And again, even though, the overall number is cut in half, it could be different for different banks. And trading and those types of trading and markets operations are still going to be relatively punitive, and so that could be tougher on JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs.
We only have like 15 seconds left, but next catalyst you're watching until the end of the quarter.
Well, next catalyst is really earnings, right? So I think what we're seeing today is the forming of earnings expectations. Barclays conference, which takes place at this time every year, Jason Goldberg running that conference. always gives us sort of the first look into the quarter. And certainly what the stocks are telling you is that it's not a pretty one.
Managing expectations. Allison Williams, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Global Banks Analyst, joining us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. Check out all of her research, BI Go, on the Bloomberg Terminal. Coming up next, we're talking about a different type of recession. This is Business Week.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That's Katie Greifeld in for Carol Massar this afternoon. I'm Tim Stenivek. Katie, when we talk about recessions, we often talk about economic recessions, okay? The National Bureau of Economic Research defines them as, quote, a significant decline in economic activity that's spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months.
Yeah.
Okay. What about a dating recession?
You know, a love recession, if you will.
Well, we bring that up because a new Stanford University study, along with recent government survey data, bolster the conclusion that COVID not only sparked this economic recession, but also a recession in Americans' social lives, and it lingers years after most U.S. adults were vaccinated. For millions, dating and other social activity never recovered, with effects that aren't just personal and psychological, but economic and perhaps even political. We got Ben Steverman with us. He writes for Bloomberg Business Week all about this type of recession. He's Bloomberg News Wealth reporter, and he joins us here in the studio. So what exactly is the definition of a dating recession?
Well, this is a term that comes out of research from Stanford University, and it looks at informal relationships. So, we actually have pretty good data that marriages pretty much held up during COVID. If you were living with someone and you liked them, you tended to survive the pandemic. But we didn't have really good data on like these people, like informal dating. So maybe that's somebody you see once a week, or these short-term relationships that go on for 3 months. And, we all know these sort of serial daters, you jump from relationship to relationship. This survey was conducted in 2017. Then this researcher did it again in 2020 and 2022. And what he found was that basically he estimates there are 13 million more single people now than there were before the recession. So that's like 1 in 5 U.S. adults. And it was very concentrated among young people, which you would expect. They're the people who are dating. And so I had that piece of data from this new study, but then I also went and analyzed the American Time Use Survey. And it's another way of getting at informal social lives and seeing what's happened to social lives over time. And actually what I found there was more disturbing. Basically, the Bureau of Labor Statistics asked people to track their days. And what we see is that face-to-face socializing has declined a lot, which is maybe not surprising that it declined a lot during the pandemic when we were all stuck at home. But the thing is, it hasn't recovered. So you would expect, the economy has bounced back from COVID. You would expect that it's face-to-face socializing would have as well, but it's really kind of stuck. We're kind of stuck basically where we were in 2021, which is the deadliest year of COVID. This is based on 2023 data. So let's hope things are coming back even more this year. But what I tried to do is then think about what is the long-term consequences for some of these trends, and maybe what are some of the psychological and even health effects that this might have.
Well, I wonder, we were talking about this a little bit in the commercial break, how much of this is demographics, because it seems like Gen Z is dating less, they don't go out as much, but I guess that wraps into, of course, a lot of them were really coming into full-fledged adulthood during the pandemic, so maybe those two are impossible to separate. But talk to us about the potential economic ramifications here.
So these informal relationships we have, obviously, social life is just important for your mental health and lots of other things too. But these informal relationships, they're the first steps that you need to move in together, get married, have kids, buy homes together. All these things are all have been delayed over if you look at way before the pandemic, you look at which milestones 30-year-olds are hitting. We keep hitting those milestones later and later in life.
Yeah.
Of buying homes and
the question though that I would have is,
and so it's going to continue.
You can't measure this. Would this have happened without the pandemic?
I think the long-term trends suggest that this kind of both the hitting the benchmarks later and just the social decline of community, decline of social connection, those are long-term trends that were happening before COVID.
Yeah.
But COVID seems to have really accelerated them. And then you raise the question about young people and how they're different. Well, what if you're a young person and you've never learned those social skills? You never learned those, the ability to kind of break out of your shell and put yourself in new environments, whether it's dance floor or, I'm obsessed with nightlife, so I was talking about nightlife. But what if you've never learned to do that? You don't even know what you're missing. So I think that it's possible something profound has shifted in our culture, and I actually see some signs. This is a little depressing, but I see some signs of optimism in that there might be a little bit of a backlash to that happening now. So the other thing I see in the Time Use Survey data is that people are attending and hosting social events just a little bit more.
Okay.
So that's the one piece of social activity that seems to be coming back. We're still spending a lot of time with our phones, a lot of time with computers, but people are hosting parties and going to parties more. So it seems like we're trying. And at least some people are trying to get out there more.
It's a good optimism to end on. Ben Steverman is a Bloomberg News wealth reporter. Check out his story. You can read it on the Bloomberg Terminal and at Bloomberg.com. He writes all about this dating recession for Bloomberg Business Week. That is going to do it for our TV time here on Bloomberg Business Week. If you're sticking with us on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Originals, and on YouTube, we got a great program coming up. We're talking about debate night in America. We're getting that preview. And how about this, Katie? An EV for less each month than a tank of gas. Yes, we're talking $20. That's next on Business Week.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
It's Bloomberg Business Week, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio in New York. We're streaming on YouTube and on Bloomberg Originals as well. I'm Tim Stenivek. That is Katie Greifeld from Bloomberg News and Bloomberg TV, in for Carol Masser. This is it, though, Katie. Carol's back tomorrow.
I know. She's back from her boat voyage, right?
Yeah, I haven't seen any pictures on Twitter. Sometimes she posts,
Yeah, she's pretty good about that.
Yeah, I haven't seen those.
Her morning walks.
I haven't seen those, so I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe she wanted to lay low.
You'll have
do
to
a
get
detox from the phone.
Have to get the lowdown tomorrow, but then you're only here for a couple days, and then you're off. I was checking your schedule. You're out for like 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, like, a few days each week. Let's just say that.
Yeah, you're
Can't really
hitting
take 2 weeks off.
You're hitting the dusty trail.
Hitting the dusty trail, heading out west.
Ride.
Yeah,
cool.
should be fun. You'll be out there too.
I will. We're not hanging out.
You invited me, but
I did.
Got no wheels. Got no wheels to get to you.
Yeah,
That's
whatever.
fine.
I mean, you do. You have 2 wheels.
2 wheels. I'll have a bike, but you'll be a little too far for me to bike to
In
you.
any case.
In any case, it is debate night in America. We're going to get a preview from David Gura. He's standing by in Philadelphia. Also, Katie, $20 a month for that EV?
Yeah.
You into it?
No.
No? Why not?
No, I'm all about the gas engine.
Okay,
I'm
well,
pretty
you're-
old school.
All right. We're also going to be joined a little later in the program by the former CEO of AT&T Business. She's got a brand new book out. All that and more over the next 2 hours. First up, though, a check on the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. We got lots going on. Great reason to keep it locked into Bloomberg Radio right through the closing bell, which will clang 59 minutes from now. The Dow lower, S&P, NASDAQ, they are both higher right now. We've got the S&P up by 18, 54.89, gain right now of 0.3%. The Dow in the red, down 124, down 0.3%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 113, up by about 0.7%. Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares, though, trading lower, down 0.2%. 10-year, 3.64%. The 2-year, 3.60%. Gold up $9 the ounce, back at $25.15, a gain of 0.4%. Big story today involves crude oil, with Texas Intermediate down 3.9%, 66.01 a barrel. Brent trading below $70 a barrel. Barrel of Brent right now down 3.3%. The global benchmark 69.43 a barrel. A rally in the world's biggest tech companies lifting stocks right now, countering a sell-off in Wall Street's biggest banks. J.P. Morgan Chase trading lower today. JPM down 5.3%. Citigroup down 2.5%. Goldman Sachs down 4.4%. And Bank of America down now by 0.2%. Well, the next big event for markets, we're not talking about the debate tonight, but on the economic calendar, tomorrow morning's CPI report, as investors will be looking for hints as to what it will mean for next week's Fed meeting. So again, recapping here, S&P 500 index up 16, a gain of 0.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks, Charlie. Do appreciate that update. Well, Katie, what are you doing tonight at 9 o'clock? What about 8 o'clock, actually?
8 o'clock, that's usually when I do skincare. I'm taking my magnesium, I'm taking my melatonin. But tonight, I might be tuning in to Bloomberg TV and radio to watch our special debate coverage.
We got special coverage of ABC's presidential debate. Begins at 8 p.m. Wall Street time. It's on Bloomberg Radio and television. It's Harris versus Trump tonight at 8 on Bloomberg. You can watch it on the Bloomberg app, which is how I plan on watching it tonight. Somebody who's going to be very close to that debate is David Gura. He's Bloomberg News correspondent and host of the Big Take podcast. He joins us from Philadelphia, where he has been holding court throughout the day, and he'll be there into the late night ahead of what I imagine promises to be a debate that many, many people watch. David, good to have you with us. Can you talk a little bit about the different ways that these two candidates have been preparing for tonight's debate?
Yeah, so Vice President Harris has been preparing in a very traditional way. She's been holed up in the western part of this state in an Omni hotel in Pittsburgh with her staff, with Anita Dunn, a longtime policy advisor and old hand when it comes to prepping for debates like this one. She's been going through policy positions. She's been watching footage like a professional athlete might going into a big game. And they've been doing mock debates as well. And this is kind of stock and trade for presidential candidates going back many years. They have somebody playing the role of Donald Trump They game out what it might be like on that stage in such close proximity to the other candidate, how they might interact with one another. So that's the vice president. Donald Trump has been taking a different tack, the same one that he took going into the debate in Atlanta. He's been having what he kind of characterizes as policy conversations, talking to a small group of advisors about policy and other things, I assume, and then going on the campaign trail as well, doing big rallies and kind of testing out lines, one-liners that he might use on the stage tonight. So markedly different, kind of old school, I wouldn't say new school, but a different type of school. And we'll see sort of how that plays out on the stage tonight here in Philadelphia, guys.
Definitely a type of school going on there. And it's interesting, David, I was talking to an investor earlier today. I asked her, what's more important? Is it CPI or is it the debate? She said, absolutely no hesitation, it's the debate. And one of the things she's interested to hear is how similar some of their proposed policies might be. Even though, I mean, personally, there's oceans of distance between these two, it does seem that they both have this kind of populist bent. And the Venn diagram there of potentially what they are proposing for certain things is kind of close.
I was tickled last week, I think it was, when the PCE numbers came out, and it was being talked about on all kinds of networks, not just financial news, economic news networks. But I think you're right. I think the debate does take precedence in terms of popular opinion and sort of interest tonight. But I think when you look at sort of what differentiates the two of them on economic issues, it's taxes and it's tariffs. So let's talk about tariffs first. Donald Trump went to the Economic Club of New York last week, gave a big speech, and kind of doubled down on a more robust, shall we say, tariffs regime if he wins office once again, and talked about, on top of that, imposing even greater taxes if a country were to sort of shy away from the dominance of the dollar. Suffice to say, that's not what the vice president believes in or what she's advocating for. So I think a marked distinction there, but Donald Trump has always been a fan of and a proponent of using tariffs as a weapon, kind of waging that kind of economic warfare. When it comes to taxes, we've gotten a lot of meat on those bones in recent days as well. Vice President Harris suggesting a higher capital gains tax, for instance, than what Donald Trump would like to see and what it's at currently, but less than what President Biden proposed when he was running for office. And then there's kind of a debate between the two of them over kind of corporate taxation as well. And then, of course, the continuation of what's known as the Trump tax cuts, which expire in a few months' time. So these are all things kind of looming in the background. I'm curious if the moderators will bring them up, ask about them explicitly, if the candidates who are obviously keenly interested in talking about these things and kind of differentiating themselves by using them will bring them up on the debate stage as well. I confess, I don't think that the minutia of tax policy is something that's bound to keep viewers engaged or interested during the course of the debate. So selfishly, while I'd like to hear more tonight here in Philadelphia, I'm not certain, nor would I bet, that we'd get a lot of sort of policy specifics on from the candidates tonight.
David, I'm going to ask you an unfair question because it requires you to look into the future, which certainly none of us can do. But help us imagine what we're talking about tomorrow and how that will indicate who ends up sort of becoming victorious with this debate. Like if we hear, X from Trump, or if we're talking about X from Trump, then he certainly has the mind share. If we're talking X from Harris, she has the mind share.
Yeah, so I think that what he wants to do is stake out this position that Kamala Harris would be essentially more of Joe Biden. If he's effective doing that, I think we could be talking about that. But I really think that it's more basic than that. It's just sort of what those interactions are like between them. Are there any moments that come out where something weird or a strong moment has happened with one candidate? And then also, the moderators have a pretty circumspect role here during this debate under the rules. They're asking questions, making sure that the candidates are speaking under time. They're not going to be fact-checking in real time. So I think that there's an opportunity, certainly for the Harris camp, for the candidate to sort of pipe up if she hears him say something that's a lie or wrong. How she handles that, I think, will be something that will be closely watched. So I think it's, on the one hand, what are the issues that are being dealt with? How are they being dealt with? And then also sort of, are there particular moments of strength? And then sort of how might the candidates capitalize on those? I should say we know a lot already about where these candidates are going after the debate ends tonight, back to the campaign trail. Vice President Harris going to North Carolina, going to Pennsylvania, Donald Trump going to Arizona, sort of how they translate any momentum that they get from tonight into the campaign, I think will be something we'll be talking about tomorrow as well.
Really quickly, David, the fact that the moderators aren't going to be playing fact checkers here. You got into an interesting engagement with Matt Miller over that topic a couple hours ago. I mean, it's interesting that they're explicitly saying that they're taking that tack. You think about what happened with the last debate, those moderators obviously coming under a little bit of heat there.
Yeah, and I think that they're likely to have that same kind of scrutiny here as well. Look, it's a very difficult job to moderate one of these debates. I haven't done it, but I can assume that it's very stressful and difficult to do when they're under this microscope, and certainly influenced by perceptions of partisanship or favoritism, and they want to avoid that at all costs. Look, the rules were agreed upon by the two campaigns, and they're adhering to those during the course of the debate. But I think that there will be people who will want them to do more, will want them to do less. Again, I think it's a tricky, if not impossible, situation that they've found themselves in, as I tried to convey to Matt Miller a couple of hours ago. I won't call it a thankless job, but it is it's a difficult job that they face here tonight.
And David Gura, we're going to be glued to our screens watching you ahead of that debate and post-debate as well, along with the team, Joe and Kaylee, covering that tonight. Bloomberg special coverage of ABC's presidential debate tonight at 8 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and Television. It's the Harris versus Trump debate tonight at 8 on Bloomberg. A big thanks to David Gura, Bloomberg news correspondent, host of the Big Take podcast out there in Philadelphia. Well, Katie, affording a new set of wheels right off the lot has become increasingly difficult in recent years. What do you think the average new car buyer in the U.S. paid in July?
I have no idea, Tim. I was hoping that you would tell me.
Close to $50,000, $48,401 for a car.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's according to Kelley Blue Book. One painful result is that average payments for buyers of new cars in the U.S. rose to $735 a month in the first quarter of the year. That's according to Experian. But if you lease it, the average monthly lease payment for new vehicles fell to $595. And some EVs can be had for even less, some for a lot less. Keith Lang is Bloomberg News automotive regulations reporter. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. It's almost too good to be true, Keith, the headline on your story about a $20 per month lease for an EV. We got to start there. Where did this happen?
So it was a deal we confirmed at a dealership in Colorado. It actually came to our attention because Chris Hilbert, who was one of the potential car buyers I quoted in the story, had mentioned it, and researching it online, I saw it had been going viral. So I contacted the dealership, and they confirmed that it was true. That was their offer in July. And even in August, they had like a $20 deal.